Have you ever been thrown out of your house by your own father and branded a liability while carrying a child? He didn't ask if I was okay or who the father was. He just erased my future for a tax break. 7 years later, I'm the one holding his debt and his lawyer's career in my hands. He thinks he's negotiating with a fund, but he's actually facing the ghost he created. My name is Lydia Turner, and the last time I sat at a dinner table in Cedar Bluff, Pennsylvania. The man at the head of the table looked at me not as his daughter, but as a depreciating asset he needed to liquidate. The dining room was warm, smelling of roasted rosemary and expensive red wine, a stark contrast to the freezing January wind rattling the window panes outside. It was a picture-perfect domestic scene, the kind you would see in a holiday catalog, except for the fact that my father, Warren Turner, was currently staring at my stomach with a look of absolute disgust. He did not ask who the father was. He did not ask if the baby was healthy. He did not ask if I had enough vitamins or a safe place to sleep. He simply looked at the swell of my belly beneath my worn-out sweater as if it were a stain on his pristine tablecloth. Then, he slammed his hand down on the mahogany. The silverware jumped. The crystal glasses shivered. "You are a liability. Lydia," he said. His voice was not loud. It was terrifyingly calm. The voice of a man conducting a business transaction that had gone sour. "You are a liability to this family, to my reputation, and to my peace of mind. Get out of my house, and do not expect a cent. You are out of the will, effective immediately." I sat there, frozen. The word liability hung in the air between us. It was a cold word, a banker's word. It stripped away 24 years of father-daughter memories and reduced me to a red line on a ledger. I looked at my mother, but she was busy studying the pattern on her china plate, refusing to meet my eyes. She had learned long ago that survival in the Turner household meant making yourself invisible when Warren was in one of his moods. But I was not going to be invisible tonight. I was 7 months pregnant, terrified, and backed into a corner. But I also had something he did not know about. I did not cry. I did not beg. The old Lydia might have fallen to her knees and pleaded for mercy, promised to be better, promised to hide away until the baby was born. But the Lydia sitting there tonight had spent the last week digging through the trash in his home office. The Lydia sitting there tonight had visited the post office and intercepted mail that he thought he had successfully hidden, slowly, deliberately. I reached under my chair. My fingers brushed against the rough texture of a small cardboard box. It was not a pretty box. It was wrapped in wrinkled brown paper, the kind used for packing cheap parcels. It looked like trash. In a way, it was trash. It was the trash he had tried to bury my future under. I lifted the box and placed it on the table. It made a dull thud, landing right next to his plate of half-eaten prime rib. Warren stopped mid-breath. He looked at the box, then at me. His eyes narrowed. "What is this?" he sneered. "A parting gift?" "I told you. Lydia, I do not want your—" "Open it," I said. My voice surprised me. It was steady. It did not shake. He scoffed, picking up his napkin to wipe his mouth. Dismissing me with a wave of his hand. "I am not opening your garbage. Take it and get out." I did not move. I stared at him, channeling every ounce of anger I had swallowed over the years. I leaned forward slightly. "Open it, Warren, or I open it for the neighbors." The threat worked. He cared more about the neighbors' opinion than his own flesh and blood. With a sigh of exaggerated annoyance, he ripped the brown paper. The lid came off. Inside, there was no jewelry, no sentimental photo album, no tearful letter of apology. Inside sat a stack of envelopes. They were not friendly letters. They were white and gray envelopes with red stamped warnings on the front. Past due, final notice, collection agency, immediate action required. Warren froze. His hand hovered over the box. He recognized them. Of course he recognized them. He was the one who had generated them. I reached out and spread the papers across the table, fanning them out like a winning poker hand. 3 years. "Dad," I said, my voice cutting through the silence of the room. 3 years of business loans, lines of credit for Turner Ridge Development, equipment leases, all of them defaulted, all of them unpaid. I pointed a shaking finger at the signature line on the document nearest to him, and all of them signed by Lydia Turner. The room went deathly silent. My mother finally looked up, her face draining of color. She looked from the papers to Warren, then to me. Warren stared at the signature. It was a good forgery. He had practiced my signature well. He had made the loops just right. But under the section labeled Personal Guarantee, it was clear what he had done. He had used my social security number. He had used my name to back loans for his failing construction projects because his own credit was shot. He had leveraged my future to buy himself time. "You committed identity theft against your own daughter," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "You took out loans in my name. You defaulted on them, and you hid the notices." Warren stared at the papers for a long moment. I watched his face, waiting for the guilt. I was waiting for the realization of what he had done to hit him. I wanted him to apologize. I wanted him to say he was desperate, that he was sorry, that he would fix it. Instead, he laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, a bark of amusement. He looked up at me, and his eyes were cold, devoid of any warmth or remorse. He leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "You are an ungrateful child," he said, shaking his head as if he were disappointed in my lack of understanding. "You think this matters? You are a disgrace. You get pregnant out of wedlock. You refuse to tell us who the father is. You embarrass this family in front of the whole town. And now you want to lecture me about business? This is not business." I slammed my hand on the table, mimicking his earlier gesture. "This is a crime. Warren, you destroyed my credit. I cannot rent an apartment. I cannot buy a car. I cannot get a loan. You crippled me before I even had a chance to start my life." He shrugged. A casual, indifferent shrug. "Then maybe you should have made better choices," he said. "Consider it a lesson. Lydia, if your life collapses because of a credit score, that is because you are weak. You are a Turner. We survive. If you cannot handle a few numbers on a page, you do not deserve the name." He picked up one of the notices, crumbled it into a ball, and tossed it onto the floor. "You are worth nothing to me," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You are a liability, and now, you are a liability with bad credit. You deserve whatever happens to you out there. Now get out of my house before I call the police and have you removed for trespassing." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had taught me how to ride a bike, the man who had sat in the front row at my high school graduation, and I realized that man never existed. That man was a mask. The real Warren Turner was sitting right here, a man who would cannibalize his own child to save his ego. I looked at my mother. She looked down at her lap again. She would not help me. She was as much a prisoner of his narrative as I was. I stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. I did not scream. I did not throw the wineglass at the wall, even though every nerve in my body wanted to. I simply looked him in the eye. I held his gaze until he blinked. It was a look of total severance, a look that said the cord was cut. I did not say goodbye. I did not say I love you. I turned my back on the warmth of the dining room and walked toward the front door. The hallway felt miles long. I grabbed my coat from the rack. It was an old wool coat, thin at the elbows, barely warm enough for a Pennsylvania winter. I buttoned it over my stomach, pulling it tight to shield the life growing inside me. When I opened the front door, the wind hit me like a physical blow. It was snowing hard, big wet flakes that clung to my eyelashes and melted against my hot skin. I stepped out onto the porch, the door clicking shut behind me with a finality that echoed in my bones. I walked down the driveway to my car. It was an old sedan, 10 years old, with a heater that only worked when the engine was running at high speeds. My boots crunched on the gravel. My hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from the adrenaline crashing through my system. I got into the driver's seat and slammed the door. The silence inside the car was deafening. I could see my breath puffing out in white clouds in the dim light of the dashboard. My phone sat on the passenger seat. I picked it up. My thumb hovered over the banking app. the credit monitoring app I had installed 3 days ago when the first rejection letter for an apartment came through. I tapped the screen. The number loaded. 520. It had dropped another 10 points since yesterday. It was in the red zone. The danger zone. It was a score that said I was untrustworthy. It was a score that said I was a failure. I stared at the house. The lights in the dining room were still on. They were probably finishing their meal. He was probably pouring another glass of wine, telling my mother that he did what had to be done. He was erasing me. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. "You stole my name," I whispered to the windshield. "You took Lydia Turner, and you turned her into a ghost. You used me as a shield for your own failures." I started the engine. It sputtered, coughed, and then roared to life. The heat was non-existent. I shivered, wrapping my arms around my belly. "I will take it back," I said, louder this time. The sound of my own voice filled the small space. I put the car in reverse. I did not look back at the house. I did not look at the window where I knew my old bedroom was. I kept my eyes on the road ahead, illuminated by the twin beams of my headlights cutting through the falling snow. I drove toward the highway, leaving Cedar Bluff behind. I had no money. I had no home. I had a credit score that classified me as a financial leper. But as the miles put distance between me and the man who called himself my father, a cold resolve settled in my chest, heavier and harder than the fear. He thought he had thrown away a liability. He had no idea he had just created his biggest creditor. And one day, I was going to come back to collect. 3 months later, the Pittsburgh sky was a relentless, bruising shade of gray. It was April, but the wind off the Three Rivers still carried a bite that cut right through my maternity leggings. I was sitting in a rental office in the North Shore, a place with beige walls and a smell like stale coffee and floor wax. Across the desk, a leasing agent named Greg was typing on his keyboard. He had a kind face, the sort of face that smiled easily when I first walked in and showed him my pay stubs. I had the cash. That was the crazy part. I had scraped together $2,400. That was first month, last month, and a security deposit. I had spent every waking hour since leaving Cedar Bluff, working temporary admin jobs and hoarding every penny, eating instant noodles and drinking tap water so I could put this money on this desk. Greg stopped typing. The smile slid off his face like it was made of wet clay. He squinted at the screen, then hit the enter key a few times, as if hoping the result would change. It did not change. He cleared his throat and looked at a point somewhere above my left shoulder. "I am sorry. Ms. Turner," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "We cannot move forward with the application." My hands tightened on my purse. I knew this was coming. I had heard it 3 times this week. But hope is a nasty habit to break. "I have the money right here," I said, reaching for the envelope. "I have a letter of employment from the staffing agency. I make 3 times the rent. It is not the income," he said, finally looking me in the eye. "It is the credit report. Our system automatically flags anything under 600. You are sitting at a 510. He turned the monitor slightly so I could see. There it was, a red number, a digital scarlet letter. "I have outstanding collections," I said, my voice steady despite the nausea rising in my throat. "I am disputing them. They are not mine. It is a case of identity theft." Greg sighed. He looked at my stomach, which was now impossible to hide under a coat. I was nearly 7 months pregnant. I looked like a walking liability. "I believe you," he said, and I think he actually meant it, but corporate policy is strict. Without a co-signer who has a score over 700, I cannot give you the keys. The system will not even let me print the lease. I stared at him. A computer system I had never seen, programmed by people I would never meet, had decided I did not deserve a roof over my head because my father had decided to buy excavators in my name. I walked out of that office and into the rain. I sat in my car, the same old sedan that had carried me away from home. It was my home now, for the last 3 weeks, since my temporary sublet expired. I had been living in the back seat. Sleeping in a car when you are in your 3rd trimester is an exercise in agony. You cannot recline the seat far enough. The steering wheel is always in the way. Your ankles swell until they look like logs. I parked in a 24-hour supercenter lot, way in the back near the employee entrance, under a flickering sodium light. I had read online that this was the safest place. If you parked on the street, the cops would knock. If you parked in a dark lot, you might get robbed. Here, between a minivan and a cart return, I was just another shadow. I used my old wool scarf as a blanket. It smelled like lavender detergent from my mother's laundry room, a cruel sensory memory that hit me every time I pulled it up to my chin. I placed my hands on my stomach. The baby was kicking. A strong, rhythmic thump against my palm. "I am sorry," I whispered to her. "I am so sorry." People think being homeless is about not having money. It is not. I had $2,000 in my pocket. Being homeless is about not having a verifiable existence. It is about the lack of an address to put on a form. It is about the way security guards look at you when you stay in the library bathroom too long just to wash your face with warm water. I spent those nights staring at the ceiling of the car, watching rain droplets race each other down the glass. I learned the rhythm of the parking lot, the street sweepers at 2 a.m, the delivery trucks at 4, the early shift workers at 5:30. I was part of an invisible ecosystem of people living on the edge, all of us pretending we were just resting our eyes before driving home. But I could not bring a baby into a sedan. I found the room in Braddock 2 days later. Braddock was not the North Shore. It was a place where the steel industry had died a slow, painful death, leaving behind skeletons of brick and iron. The ad was taped to a telephone pole near the bus stop. Room for rent, cash, no questions. The landlord was a man named Miller. He looked like he had been carved out of granite and left out in the rain for 50 years. He met me at the door of a row house that leaned slightly to the left. He wore a stained tank top and smelled of tobacco and motor oil. He did not ask for a credit check. He did not ask for references. He looked at the cash in my hand. Then he looked at my belly. "It is upstairs." He said, "Shared bath. Kitchen is mine. But you can use the microwave. No parties. No loud music. I do not party." I said. He narrowed his eyes. "You got a guy coming around?" "I do not want drama. If an angry boyfriend comes kicking my door down, you are out. No guy." I said, "Just me. And the baby." He grunted. "Babies cry. I will keep her quiet." I promised. He took the cash. $700. He handed me a key that felt heavy and greasy in my hand. "Can you live quiet?" he asked, blocking the doorway for a second. "That is the only rule here. You live quiet, you stay, you make noise, you go. I can live quiet." I said. The room was small. The wallpaper was peeling in the corners, revealing layers of floral patterns from decades past. The floorboards groaned when I stepped on them. The window looked out onto an alley where stray cats fought over trash, but it had a door that locked. It had a bed with a mattress that sagged in the middle. It was a palace. I sat on the edge of the bed and exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. I was safe. Now, I had to survive. I worked 2 jobs, by day. I was a data processor for a logistics company in the Strip District. It was mind-numbing work, staring at spreadsheets and verifying shipping codes for 8 hours. But it was seated work, and the office was air-conditioned. I kept my head down. I did not socialize in the break room. I did not want anyone asking questions about why I wore the same 2 maternity outfits every week. By night, I waited tables at a diner called the Iron Skillet. It was one of those places that never closed, serving eggs and bacon to truck drivers and insomniacs at 3 a.m. Working a diner shift at 8 months pregnant is a specific kind of torture. My center of gravity was off. Navigating between tight tables with a tray full of hot coffee and pancakes required the grace of a dancer, which I did not have. My back screamed. My feet throbbed so hard I could feel my pulse in my toes. But the tips were cash, and I needed cash. There was a regular, a man named Saul, who always ordered the meatloaf. One night, he watched me waddle over to refill his coffee. He looked at my stomach, then at my tired eyes. "You should be home with your feet up, honey," he said, trying to be kind. It is not right. You working like this. I poured the coffee without spilling a drop. I did not smile. I did not give him the tragedy face he was expecting. My feet are fine. Saul, I said, do you want pie? I refused to sell my pity. I saw the way people looked at me. The pregnant girl alone. The ringless finger. The tired eyes. They wrote a story in their heads about me. Poor thing. Bad choices. Sad life. I let them think it. It was better than them knowing the truth. It was better than them knowing I was the daughter of Warren Turner, the man who built half the subdivisions in Cedar Bluff, and that I was serving them fries because he had sold my name to save his own skin. When I was not working, I was studying. I went to the public library on weekends. I did not read parenting books. I did not read novels. I went to the reference section and pulled out books on commercial law, debt collection, and credit reporting. My family used to laugh at this stuff. My father called contracts lawyer fodder. He bragged about never reading the fine print because he knew people. He thought details were for little people, for clerks and secretaries. Well, I was a little person now, and I was learning that the details were where the weapons were hidden. I learned what a personal guarantee actually meant. I learned the difference between a secured and unsecured loan. I learned about statutes of limitations and the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. I sat at the wooden table in the library, surrounded by high school students doing homework, and I dissected the language of my destruction. I realized something that chilled me to the bone. This was not just bad luck. This was not just my father being sloppy. The system was designed for this. It was designed to prioritize the creditor above all else. If a name is on the paper, the person attached to that name is on the hook. It does not matter if the signature was forged unless you can prove it in a court of law, and proving it requires lawyers, money, and time. 3 things the victim rarely has. My father knew this. He banked on it. He banked on the fact that I would be too poor, too overwhelmed, and too ashamed to fight back. He thought the shame would silence me. He thought I would accept the label of liability and fade away. He was wrong. Maya was born on a humid Tuesday in June. I went into labor during my shift at the data entry job. I finished the spreadsheet I was working on, logged out, and drove myself to the hospital. I did not call anyone. Who would I call? The labor was long, 14 hours of pain that felt like it was tearing me apart. But when the doctor finally placed her on my chest, the world stopped. She was tiny. She had a tuft of dark hair and eyes that were squeezed shut against the harsh hospital lights. She was slippery and warm and heavy with life. I looked at the plastic bracelet on her tiny wrist. It said Baby Girl Turner. I ran my thumb over the letters. Turner, my name, his name, a name that was currently synonymous with bad debt and broken promises. I promise you. I whispered into her damp hair. I promise you. Maya, this name will not be a burden to you. I will scrub it clean. I will make it mean something else. You will never have to hide your mail. You will never have to be afraid of a knock at the door. She gripped my finger with a strength that surprised me. She was a fighter. She had to be. I took her back to the room in Braddock 3 days later. Miller, the landlord, actually smiled when he saw her. He even fixed the radiator that had been rattling for weeks. Without me asking. That night, Maya fell asleep in a second-hand crib I had bought from a charity shop. The room was quiet, lit only by the street lamp outside. I could not sleep. I sat on the floor with the box. The box of letters I had thrown on the dinner table that night. I had taken it with me when I left. I spread them out on the floorboards. There were dozens of them now. I had added the new ones that had been forwarded or that I had tracked down. I took a black marker and started underlining. Not the amounts. I knew the amounts. I was looking at the dates. Loan originated. August 12th, 3 years ago. I froze. August 12th. I closed my eyes and went back in time. August 12th, 3 years ago. I was in college. I was on a study abroad trip in Italy. I was 4,000 miles away from Pennsylvania. I pulled another letter, a credit line increase authorization, dated December 24th, 2 years ago. Christmas Eve. We were all at the house. I remembered that night. My father had been in his office for an hour, claiming he was wrapping presents. He wasn't wrapping presents. He was forging my signature on a bank document while I was in the next room drinking eggnog with my mother. I felt a cold rage settle in my stomach, sharper and more focused than anything I had felt before. This was not just desperation. This was calculation. He had planned these moments. He had waited until I was out of the country, or distracted by holidays, to execute his fraud. He had looked at me, his daughter, and calculated exactly how much credit he could bleed from me before I noticed. I picked up a pen and a notebook. I started a new list, not a list of debts, but a list of evidence, data forgery, my location at the time, proof of my location. I wrote until my hand cramped. I wrote until the sun started to bleed through the cheap curtains. I looked over at Maya, sleeping peacefully. She was innocent. I was innocent. And Warren Turner was going to learn that he had not just kicked a pregnant girl out of his house. He had sent a forensic accountant into the wild. He thought the debt was my shackle. He didn't realize it was actually the map to his throat, and I was just learning how to read it. I left the diner 6 months after Maya was born. I traded the smell of grease and burnt coffee for the smell of cheap carpet cleaner and ozone in a cubicle farm off the highway. It was a commercial debt collection agency called Sterling Associates. They hired me because I typed 90 words per minute, and I didn't flinch when the manager, a guy with a neck as thick as a tree trunk, screamed in my face during the interview to test my stress tolerance. I didn't tell him that after living in a car and staring down Warren Turner. A screaming manager was about as intimidating as a barking chihuahua. Most of the people on the floor were loud. They were aggressive. They thought collecting debt was about volume, about intimidation, about shouting people into submission. They were hammer throwers. I decided to be a scalpel. I realized very quickly that the power wasn't in the phone call. The power was in the paperwork. I read the contracts. I didn't just skim them. I dissected them. I found that most debtors, especially the business owners, were arrogant. They signed things they didn't read because they thought they were smarter than the bank. They thought the personal guarantee clause was just a formality. It was not a formality. It was a noose. I became the top collector in the division within 4 months. I didn't yell. I would get a CEO on the phone, a man who was used to bullying his staff, and I would speak very softly. I would quote page 4, paragraph 3 of his original loan agreement. I would remind him of the specific asset schedule he had submitted. I would tell him exactly what his credit rating would look like at 5 o'clock that afternoon if the wire transfer didn't hit. I learned that debt is not just a number. It is a relationship. It is a psychological weight. For the poor, debt is terror. It is the fear of losing the roof over your head. But for the wealthy, or the people pretending to be wealthy, debt is something else entirely. It is an insult. It is a threat to their ego. If you squeeze a man's wallet, he gets angry. If you squeeze his reputation, he gets compliant. I spent my days at Sterling Associates, but I spent my nights building my arsenal. I didn't want to work for a collection agency forever. I didn't want to make 10% commission on someone else's paper. I wanted to own the paper. I realized that the person who holds the note holds the control. The bank doesn't want the control. The bank wants the cash flow. When a loan goes bad, the bank panics. They want to offload it. They sell it to secondary markets for pennies on the dollar just to clear their books. That was the gap. That was where I was going to build my kingdom. I enrolled in night classes. I didn't have the money for a prestigious MBA, but I didn't need a network. I needed technical skills. I took courses on distressed asset management. I studied bankruptcy law until my eyes burned. I learned how to trace hidden assets, how to uncover shell companies, and how to pierce the corporate veil. I lived like a monk. Maya and I stayed in that room in Braddock for another 2 years before moving to a tiny, one-bedroom apartment that wasn't much bigger but had its own kitchen. I saved every single dollar that didn't go to rent, formula, or daycare. I wore the same 3 suits to work every day. I drove the same car until the transmission finally died. And then I took the bus. I did not want to be rich fast. I wanted to be formidable. Wealth can be lost. Competence cannot be taken away. 4 years after I walked out of my father's house, I registered my own LLC. I called it Iron Wren Capital. It sounded small, unassuming. A wren is a tiny bird, easily overlooked. But iron does not break. I didn't have millions of dollars. I started small. I went to local community banks, the ones that were too small to package their bad debt to Wall Street, but too overwhelmed to chase it themselves. I offered to buy their distressed commercial paper, the loans that were 90 days past due, the ones they had given up on. I bought my first portfolio for $4,000. It was a bundle of small business loans with a face value of $50,000. Most people would look at that file and see garbage. I looked at it and saw opportunity. I made $42,000 on that first bundle in 6 months. I reinvested every penny. I developed a philosophy. I was not interested in the single mother who defaulted on her car loan because she got sick. I was not interested in the family whose house went under because the factory closed. There is no sport in hunting the helpless, and there is no money in squeezing a stone. My target was different. I hunted the pretenders. I hunted the men who drove leased luxury cars but didn't pay their suppliers. I hunted the business owners who transferred the company assets to their wives' names and then declared bankruptcy. I hunted the people who used debt to fund a lifestyle they couldn't afford and then used their good name to stall the consequences. I built a filter. It was a set of criteria I used when scanning the lists of bad debt available for sale. I wasn't just looking at the numbers. I was looking at the behavior pattern. First, was there a personal guarantee? This was non-negotiable. If they didn't sign their name to it personally, I didn't touch it. I wanted skin in the game. Second, was there a discrepancy between the business failure and the personal lifestyle? If a business collapsed, but the owner just bought a vacation home in Florida, that was my prey. Third, and most importantly, was there evidence of familial exploitation? Did they use a child, a spouse, or an aging parent as a shield? That was my specific signature. That was the ghost of Warren Turner guiding my hand. Every time I saw a file where a father had co-signed with a son and then left the son holding the bag, I bought that debt, and I collected with a ferocity that surprised even me. Iron Wren. Capital grew. I hired a paralegal. Then I hired a forensic accountant. We worked out of a small office in the Strip District, a converted warehouse with exposed brick walls. It was quiet. We didn't have a call center floor. We didn't have auto dialers. We were snipers. 7 years. It had been 7 years since the dinner party. Maya was in first grade. She was smart, sharp as a tack, and she knew that her mom fixed broken promises for a living. That was how I explained it to her. I was sitting at my desk on a Tuesday afternoon. It was raining, a slow, steady Pittsburgh drizzle. My 3 monitors were glowing with the blue light of spreadsheets. I was scanning a new portfolio offered by a consortium of regional lenders. It was a bulk sale, a mix of commercial real estate and equipment financing loans that had gone toxic. I was running my filter. Scroll, delete, too small, no assets, legitimate bankruptcy. Then, my cursor stopped. Row 423. The debtor name was familiar. Not just familiar, it was etched into the lining of my stomach. Turner Ridge Development. I felt a physical jolt, like I had touched a live wire. My heart didn't speed up. It actually seemed to stop for a second, then thudded heavily against my ribs. I leaned closer to the screen. I highlighted the row. I expanded the data fields. It wasn't just one loan. It was 3 separate obligations bundled together from 3 different originating institutions: Allegheny Community Lending, Keystone Regional Bank, Monument Credit Union. I looked at the status: default, charged off, placed for sale. I looked at the total amount: $520,000 and change. In the world of high finance, $500,000 is a rounding error. It is nothing. But for a local developer in Cedar Bluff, Pennsylvania, for a man who leveraged his life on appearances, for a man who needed to project success to maintain his social standing at the country club, $520,000 was a death sentence. I looked at the collateral column. Heavy machinery, excavators, bulldozers, a few undeveloped lots of land near the river. I looked at the guarantor column, Warren Turner, and then I saw the notes attached to the file by the bank officers. Borrower, difficult to contact. Repeated promises of refinancing not met. Claims market conditions. Assets may be overvalued. I sat back in my chair. The office sounds faded away. The hum of the server, the clicking of my accountant's keyboard, the rain on the window. All I could hear was the echo of his voice from 7 years ago. You are a liability. He was drowning. The great Warren Turner, the man who treated people like line items, was drowning in red ink. He was doing exactly what I knew he would do. He was robbing Peter to pay Paul, spinning plates, lying to banks, and hoping the music didn't stop. But the music had stopped, and the banks were selling his chair. I looked at the price, because the debt was considered toxic and difficult to collect, and because it had been aging for over a year. The ask was 62 cents on the dollar. I could buy my father's fate for roughly $320,000. I checked my operating capital accounts. I had the liquidity. I had spent 4 years building a war chest for exactly this kind of acquisition, though I had never admitted to myself that I was waiting for this specific name. I didn't feel joy. That was the strange part. I didn't feel a rush of giddy excitement. I felt a cold, hard sense of completion, like a puzzle piece snapping into place. I wasn't looking at a spreadsheet anymore. I was looking at a map that led back to the snowy driveway in Cedar Bluff. But I wasn't going back to knock on the door and ask for an apology. He would never give me that. He was incapable of it. I was going to buy the door. I was going to buy the house. I was going to buy the ground he stood on. I picked up the phone and dialed the broker representing the bank consortium. My voice was calm, professional, the voice of the woman who owned Iron Wren Capital, not the voice of the girl who slept in a sedan. I am looking at the tranche labeled PA West commercial. I said, I am interested in the Turner Ridge files, all 3 of them. I want to execute a purchase agreement. The broker sounded surprised. That is some ugly paper. Ms. Turner, are you sure? The borrower is known to be litigious and difficult. I know. I said, I know exactly who the borrower is. Send me the contract. I hung up the phone. I looked at the rain sliding down the glass. 7 years ago. He told me I was out of the will. He thought he had cut me off. He didn't understand how the world worked. You don't get to just cut people off when you owe a debt. The debt follows you. It waits. It grows interest. And sometimes it grows up, learns the law, and comes back to buy you out. I clicked open a new file on my computer. I named it simply Project Homecoming. I wasn't just going to collect the money. Money was easy. I was going to collect the truth. I was going to expose the rot that he had hidden under his expensive suits for decades. I looked at the clock. It was time to pick up Maya from school. I stood up, smoothed my blazer, and grabbed my bag. I walked out of my office with a step that was lighter than it had been in years. The game was set. The pieces were moving, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one on the defensive. I was the bank. I did not pull the trigger immediately. In the world of distressed debt, patience is not just a virtue. It is a weapon. If you buy a debt and call for collection the next day, you are just an annoyance. But if you watch, if you wait, if you learn the rhythm of your target's desperation, you become a catastrophe. I spent 6 months living inside the digital footprint of Turner Ridge Development. I did not make a single phone call to Cedar Bluff. I did not drive past the house. I sat in my office in Pittsburgh, surrounded by the hum of servers, and I watched my father bleed. I had the loan documents I had purchased, but those were just the skeleton. I needed the muscle and the blood. I subscribed to construction industry trade journals. I paid for access to supplier credit reports. I set up alerts for every permit filing, every lien, and every court docket that mentioned his name. I learned that he was slow-walking his payments to everybody. The lumber yard in Beaver County had put him on a cash-on-delivery basis. That is the kiss of death in construction. If you cannot get materials on credit, your cash flow strangles itself. I saw the payroll patterns. He was paying his crew on alternating Fridays, sometimes 3 days late. In the construction world, if you do not pay your crew on time, tools start disappearing, and then walls start ending up crooked. But the biggest thing I found was the lie he was telling to stay alive. He was pitching a massive new project called the Ohio River Corridor. According to the press releases and the Planning Commission minutes I dug up, it was going to be a luxury mixed-use complex, high-end condos, retail space, a marina. On paper, it looked like a $50 million revitalization project. He was using this project to dazzle his creditors. He was telling them, "Wait for the corridor money. Once the pre-sales hit, everyone gets paid with interest." I pulled the land deeds. I pulled the environmental surveys. There was no project. He owned 2 acres of swampy land that was zoned for light industrial, not residential. He had not broken ground. He did not have the permits. The Ohio River Corridor was a hallucination. It was a Ponzi scheme of promises. He was taking deposits for units that did not exist to pay the interest on loans that were 3 years old. He was not just broke. He was committing fraud. Again, I was building a timeline of his collapse on my whiteboard when I found the first anomaly. It was in the fine print of one of the commercial loans I had acquired from Keystone Regional Bank. Usually, a loan like that is secured by hard assets, land, yellow iron, trucks, and this one was. But there was a secondary addendum, a cross-collateralization agreement that referenced a third-party guarantor. I squinted at the scanned PDF. The guarantor listed was not a person. It was an entity. Vance Legal Group, LLC. I froze. I knew that name. Everyone in the Pennsylvania business world knew that name. But I knew it for a different reason. Clifford Vance. He was my father's attorney. He was the man who wore 3-piece suits that cost more than my first car. He was a fixture at the country club, the kind of lawyer who didn't go to court to argue. He went to the back room to make deals. He was famous for creative structuring. If you wanted to hide assets from a divorce, you hired Vance. If you wanted to bury a liability in a shell company, you hired Vance. Why was his law firm guaranteeing a portion of my father's construction loan? Lawyers do not guarantee their clients' debts. That is rule number 1 of legal survival. You represent the client. You do not become the client, unless you are in it together. I started digging into Clifford Vance. I turned my forensic lens away from Turner Ridge for a week and focused entirely on the man who was supposed to be the smartest shark in the tank. It turns out, even sharks get caught in nets. Vance was overextended. I found a UCC filing against his law office's building in downtown Pittsburgh. He owned the building, a beautiful historic renovation, but he had refinanced it 18 months ago to pull out equity. Why does a successful lawyer pull equity out of his own office? Gambling debts? Divorce? Or maybe he invested in a sure-thing project called the Ohio River Corridor? I pulled the credit report on Vance Legal Group. It was not a disaster like my father's, but it was cracking. There was a mortgage payment on the building that was 45 days past due. Not 90 days, not default, just 45 days. It was in that gray zone where the bank is annoyed but polite. They were sending him emails, not process servers. I sat back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. The ceiling fans spun slowly, chopping the stale air. I realized I had been thinking too small. I had been planning to use the debt to foreclose on my father. But if I did that, he would hire Clifford Vance. Vance would delay me. He would file injunctions. He would bury me in paper for 2 years while my father hid his assets. Vance was the shield. But what if I bought the shield? The logic was so cold, so perfect. It made me shiver. If I bought the mortgage on Vance's office building, I became his creditor. If he missed one more payment, and looking at his cash flow, he was going to. I could foreclose on his law firm's headquarters. I could own the roof over his head. I understood then that this was the title of my life. This was the strategy. If I bought my father's debt, I could squeeze him. But if I bought his lawyer's debt, I bought his silence. I bought the mouth that spoke for him. I decided to run two parallel operations. Operation 1 was finalizing the paperwork on the Turner Ridge debt. That was almost done. I had the assignment of mortgage agreements ready to be stamped. Operation 2 was Vance. This had to be surgical. I could not let Vance know that Iron Wren Capital was buying his mortgage. If he saw the name, he might dig. He might connect me to the Turner debt. I created a new special purpose vehicle, a shell company nested inside another shell company. I called it Archway Holdings. It sounded boring. It sounded institutional. I contacted the mid-sized regional bank that held Vance's mortgage. I spoke to their distressed asset manager. I told him I was looking for commercial real estate exposure in downtown Pittsburgh, and I was willing to take on performing but troubled notes. They were happy to sell. Banks hate uncertainty. Vance had been late 3 times in a year. To them, he was a headache. To me, he was the key to the castle. We started the transfer process. It would take 30 days. During those 30 days, I went back to the old files, the box of shame, the letters I had thrown on the dinner table 7 years ago. I needed to be sure. When I walked into that room to confront them, I needed more than just financial leverage. I needed moral ammunition. I needed to prove that the fraud wasn't just a business tactic. It was a personal violation. I was examining a scanned copy of a loan modification agreement from 5 years ago. This was one of the documents my father had forged. It was a forbearance agreement, basically a promise to the bank that he would pay later if they didn't sue him now. It required a personal guarantee. My name was signed at the bottom. Lydia Turner. I looked at the date. I was living in the car when this was signed. I was sleeping in a parking lot in Braddock, freezing, while he was signing my name to buy himself another 6 months of country club dues. But then my eyes drifted to the left, to the witness line, in Pennsylvania. For a document like this to be binding, the signature often needs to be witnessed or notarized. My father had used a notary who was notorious for remote stamping a document without the person being in the room. That was illegal, but hard to prove. However, next to the notary stamp, there was a witness signature, a person who claimed they saw Lydia Turner sign that paper. I zoomed in. The handwriting was jagged, hurried, but I knew it. I knew the loop of the E. I knew the sharp slant of the P. Evan Price. The air left my lungs. Evan Price, my college boyfriend, the man I had loved with the desperate, all-consuming intensity of a 21-year-old, the father of Maya. When I got pregnant, Evan had panicked. He was young, he was scared, and my father had taken him aside for a talk. I never knew what was said in that talk. I only knew that Evan broke up with me 2 days later, saying we were too different and that he needed to focus on his career. He never called. He never asked about the baby. He vanished. I thought he was just a coward. I thought he had run away to another city to start over. I typed Evan Price into the search bar of the Turner Ridge employee directory I had scraped from their unsecure website server. There he was, Evan Price, Senior Project Manager, Turner Ridge Development. I stared at his photo. He looked older, heavier. He was wearing a hard hat and a vest with the company logo. He was smiling. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. He hadn't run away. He had stayed. My father had bought him. That was the long talk. My father had offered him a job, a career, a salary, on the condition that he walk away from me and the problem I was carrying. But it was worse than that. Looking at the document on my screen, I saw the depth of the betrayal. Evan hadn't just abandoned us. He had helped my father frame me. He had signed as a witness. He had looked at a piece of paper with my forged signature, a signature that was ruining the life of the woman he had slept with, the mother of his unborn child, and he had signed his name next to it. He had validated the lie. He was the witness to a crime against me. I stood up from my desk. I walked to the window of my office. The rain had stopped, but the city below looked distorted, smeared by the anger vibrating behind my eyes. For years, I had told myself that Evan was just weak, that he was a boy who couldn't handle a man's responsibility. I had even, in my softer moments, hoped that maybe he thought about us. Maybe he wondered about his daughter. But he was not weak. He was complicit. He was working for my father. He was managing the Ohio River Corridor project. He was taking a paycheck funded by the very fraud that had put me on the street. I looked at the 3 names on my mental chessboard: Warren Turner, the architect; Clifford Vance, the shield; Evan Price, the witness. They were all connected. They were a knot of lies and mutual protection. My father provided the money. Vance provided the legal cover. Evan provided the operational support and the silence. They thought they were safe. They thought the girl they had discarded was gone. Erased. A statistic in a poverty report. I turned back to my computer. I opened the file for the Vance deal. I checked the status. Pending approval. I picked up the phone and called my contact at the bank holding Vance's mortgage. I want to expedite the closing. I said, my voice was ice. Is there a rush? The banker asked. Yes. I said, I have a schedule to keep. I will pay the expediting fee. I want the papers signed by Friday. I hung up. I looked at the photo of Evan Price one more time. I looked at his smile. It was the smile of a man who thought he had gotten away with it. I saved the image. I dragged it into the folder named Project Homecoming. I wasn't just coming for the money anymore. I was coming for the history. I spent the next 48 hours finalizing the trap. I drafted the purchase agreements. I had my paralegal, a sharp woman named Sarah who asked no questions, prepare the notice of default letters. We were going to serve them all at once, but not by mail. I wasn't going to send a letter. I was going to invite them to a meeting. I needed a venue. I couldn't bring them to my office. Iron Wren Capital was too small, too personal. I needed neutral ground, or rather, ground that looked neutral but was actually a kill box. I rented a conference room in a high-rise in Columbus, Ohio. Why Ohio? Because the Ohio River Corridor project was ostensibly based there. It would make sense to them. If a new investor wanted to talk about refinancing their debt, they would expect to meet in Columbus. I set the date. A Friday afternoon, 4 o'clock. Why Friday? Because in the banking world, Friday at 4 o'clock is when the wire window closes. It creates pressure. It creates panic. If you don't sign by 4, you don't get the money until Monday. And for men like my father, a weekend without money can be a lifetime. I sent the invitations through a generic email address associated with Archway Holdings. Debt refinancing and capital injection for Turner Ridge Development. Mandatory meeting for principals and legal counsel. I knew they would come. They were desperate. They were drowning. If someone threw them a rope, they wouldn't check to see if it was a noose. I sat alone in my apartment that night. Maya was asleep in the next room. I could hear her soft breathing through the open door. She was 7 years old. She had her father's eyes. I walked into her room and smoothed the blanket over her shoulder. He sold you for a paycheck. I whispered to the dark. He watched me get erased so he could be a project manager. I went back to the living room and poured myself a glass of water. My hand was steady. I had the debt. I had the lawyer's mortgage. I had the evidence of the forgery. And I had the witness. The board was set. The pieces were in position. I wasn't Lydia Turner, the liability. I wasn't the pregnant girl in the snow. I was the majority shareholder of their destruction. And the meeting was about to be called to order. Monday morning broke over Pittsburgh with the kind of relentless, driving rain that scrubs the city clean. I sat at my desk, a cup of black coffee steaming next to my keyboard, and stared at the list of 3 phone numbers. These were not just numbers. They were the gatekeepers to my father's ruin. I picked up the handset. My hand did not shake. 7 years ago, I had trembled while holding a positive pregnancy test in a gas station bathroom. Today, I was holding the fate of Turner Ridge Development, and I felt nothing but the cold precision of a surgeon scrubbing in. I dialed the first number. Allegheny Community Lending. I asked for the vice president of commercial workout. His name was Mr. Henderson. I knew from my research that he was 2 years away from retirement and likely exhausted by the bad debt sitting on his books. "This is Lydia from Wren Harbor Holdings," I said. My voice was professional, clipped, devoid of any regional accent. "I am looking at a tranche of non-performing assets you have listed. Specifically, the Turner Ridge commercial notes." I could hear Henderson's sigh on the other end of the line. It was a heavy, weary sound. "Ms. Lydia," he said, "we have had some interest in that file, but the borrower is complicated." "I am not interested in the borrower's personality," I said, cutting him off gently. "I am interested in the paper. I have done my due diligence. I know the collateral is depreciating. I know the heavy equipment has been sitting in a yard in Beaver County gathering rust for 6 months. And I know you have been chasing Warren Turner for payments that never arrive." I let the silence hang there for a second. "I am offering to clean your books. Mr. Henderson," I continued. "I will buy the entire position, principal and interest, but I'm not paying face value for a headache." "What is the offer?" he asked. The weariness was gone, replaced by caution. 62 cents on the dollar, I said. "Cash, settlement within 48 hours, he scoffed. 62? That is a fire sale price. The collateral alone is worth— "The collateral is phantom," I interrupted, my voice sharpening. "We both know the excavators are leveraged. We both know the land in the Ohio River corridor is swamp water zoned for industrial use, not the luxury condos he promised you. If you foreclose, you are going to spend $50,000 on legal fees just to fight his lawyer, Clifford Vance, and then you are going to auction off rusty bulldozers for scrap." I paused. I let the name Clifford Vance land. I knew Vance had buried Henderson in paperwork for months. "Or," I said, dropping my voice back to a reasonable pitch, "you can sign the assignment agreement today. You take the loss against your tax liability, you clear the bad debt ratio for your quarterly report, and you never have to hear Warren Turner's voice again." There was a long silence on the line. I could hear the rain tapping against my window. I could hear the hum of the server in the corner. "Send over the term sheet," Henderson said. "One down." I hung up and immediately dialed the second number. Keystone Regional Bank, then the third, Monument Credit Union. The conversations were almost identical. These lenders were tired. They were exhausted by the promises of next month and market conditions. My father had used up all his charisma. He had spent years charming them, then years avoiding them. Now, they just wanted him gone, by noon. I had verbal agreements from all three. I sat back in my chair. The adrenaline was a low hum in my blood. I had just agreed to spend $320,000 of my company's capital. It was a massive risk. If I failed to collect, Iron Wren Capital would be insolvent. I would be back to zero. But I wasn't going to fail. I turned to my computer to draft the paperwork. I was not using my primary company name. I had created a special purpose vehicle for this transaction. Wren Harbor Holdings. It sounded generic. It sounded like a hedge fund from Connecticut or a private equity firm from New York. It did not sound like the daughter he had kicked out into the snow. Legally, Wren Harbor was a subsidiary of a subsidiary. My name did not appear on the public-facing documents. My attorney, a woman named Naomi who asked very few questions as long as the checks cleared, would sign as the authorized agent. By Wednesday afternoon, the wires were sent. The digital signatures were executed. I received the confirmation emails one by one. Assignment of debt, executed. Transfer of lien rights, recorded. Allonges and endorsements, complete. I stared at the screen. I now owned the debt of Turner Ridge Development. I was the primary creditor. I could foreclose tomorrow. I could seize his bank accounts. I could drag him into court. But that wasn't enough. I needed the shield. I shifted my focus to the second monitor, the file for Clifford Vance. This was a more delicate operation. Vance was not broke. He was just overextended. He was smart, arrogant, and legally dangerous. If he sniffed a trap, he would turtle up and sue me for harassment before I even got in the door. I had approached his lender, a mid-sized bank in Philadelphia. With a different proposition, I wasn't just buying bad debt, I was offering to restructure a troubled asset. I got Vance's loan officer on the phone. "We are an asset management firm specializing in professional services real estate," I told him. "We are looking to acquire the note on the Vance Legal Group building. We understand the borrower is behind, but we believe the asset has value." The bank was happy to unload it. Vance had been a nightmare client, paying late, arguing about interest rate adjustments, threatening to move his business but never actually doing it. I bought the mortgage, but here was the twist. I didn't call the loan immediately. Instead, I had my team draft a restructuring proposal to send to Vance. It was a beautiful document. It looked like a lifeline. It offered him a lower interest rate. It offered to capitalize his past due payments into the back end of the loan, effectively curing his default immediately. It looked like a generous offer from a new investment fund that wanted to keep a high-profile tenant happy. Vance would read it and think he had won. He would think he had charmed yet another bank. But buried in the terms and conditions, on page 42 of the 60-page agreement, was a clause titled Section 8.4, Conflict of Interest and Transparency Certification. It sounded like standard compliance boilerplate. It required the borrower to certify under penalty of perjury and immediate default that they held no undisclosed financial interests in any client entities they represented, and that they had not engaged in any fraudulent transfer or concealment of assets on behalf of any client that would jeopardize their own solvency. It was a trap tailored specifically for Clifford Vance. If he signed it, he was certifying that he wasn't helping Warren Turner hide money, but I knew he was. I had the evidence of the shell companies. If he signed it, and I produced that evidence, he wouldn't just be in default on his mortgage. He would be liable for fraud against his lender. I could strip him of his building, his law license, and his reputation in one stroke. I sent the proposal to Vance's office via courier. 2 hours later, I got a call from Naomi. "He signed it," she said, her voice sounding amused. "He didn't even redline the transparency clause. He was too focused on the interest rate reduction." "He thinks we're just money," I said. "He thinks we don't read the files." "He's sending the courier back now," Naomi said. "You own him, Lydia." I hung up. I owned the debt. I owned the lawyer. Now, it was time to close the jaws. I needed to get them all in one room. I couldn't just sue them. A lawsuit is slow. A lawsuit allows them to hide behind pleadings and motions. I needed a confrontation. I needed them to look me in the eye, or rather, look the investor in the eye, and lie. I needed them to commit the final act of fraud while I was watching. I rented a conference room in Columbus, Ohio. I chose Columbus for a specific reason. It was the headquarters of the Ohio River Corridor project my father was faking. It gave the meeting legitimacy. If a new investor wanted to talk, they would want to talk near the project site. It was a high-end space, the kind with floor-to-ceiling glass windows overlooking the city, polished granite tables, and uncomfortable ergonomic chairs. It smelled of money and intimidation. I drafted the email. I sent it to Warren Turner, Evan Price, and Clifford Vance. Subject: Urgent Capital Injection/Debt Restructuring. Turner Ridge Development. Gentlemen, Wren Harbor Holdings has acquired the outstanding debt positions of Turner Ridge Development from your previous lenders. We are reviewing the file for immediate foreclosure and asset liquidation. However, based on the potential of the Ohio River Corridor project, we are willing to consider a forbearance agreement and a possible capital injection of $1.5 million to stabilize the company. This offer is time-sensitive. We have a disbursement window open until this Friday at 4:00 p.m. If the restructuring agreement is not signed in person by all principals and legal counsel by that time, the window will close, and we will proceed with immediate liquidation of all assets on Monday morning. Meeting location: 100 South 3rd Street, Columbus, Ohio, Suite 400. Time: Friday, 2 p.m. I hit send. The time pressure was the key. Disbursement window closes at 4 p.m. It was a classic pressure tactic. It forced them to panic. It forced them to rush. If they thought they had a weekend to think about it, Vance would dig. He would research Wren Harbor Holdings. He might find the link to Iron Wren. He might find me. But with 48 hours and the promise of $1.5 million dangling in front of them, they wouldn't look. They would run toward the money like starving dogs. My father needed that money. He needed it to pay off the suppliers who were threatening to walk. He needed it to keep up the appearance of being a tycoon. And Vance? Vance needed the win to prove he was still the magic man. And Evan? Evan would just do what he was told. I leaned back in my chair and watched the rain stop. The sun was trying to break through the clouds, casting a pale, watery light over the Pittsburgh skyline. I picked up my phone and called Naomi. "It is set," I said. "They are going to bite." "Are you going to be there?" Naomi asked. "No," I said. "Not at first. I want you to run the meeting. I want you to play the role of the hard-nosed institutional investor. Make them sweat. Make them beg." "And then?" "And then," I said, looking at the box of old letters sitting on my bookshelf, "I will walk in." "Lydia," Naomi said, her voice softening slightly, "are you sure you're ready for this? Seeing him again?" I touched the scar on my palm where I had dug my fingernails in 7 years ago. The night I walked out into the snow. "I am not the one who needs to be ready," I said. "He thinks he is going to a negotiation. He doesn't know he is going to his own autopsy." I hung up. I spent the rest of the day preparing the restructuring agreement. This was the document they would have to sign to get the fake money. It wasn't just a loan document. It was a confession. I inserted a truth in lending certification. It required Warren Turner to list all previous guarantors. It required him to certify that, throughout the company's entire history, no signatures had ever been falsified. It required him to itemize every asset he'd moved or transferred over the last 5 years. And then I slipped in the tripwire. Immediate default condition. If any statement or representation in this agreement is determined to be untrue, or if any collateral listed has been sold or otherwise disposed of prior to execution, the borrower consents to an automatic confession of judgment for the full balance of the debt, plus punitive damages, and irrevocably waives any right to appeal. I knew, without question, that he'd quietly unloaded 2 excavators just last week. Cash deal. No paperwork. I had surveillance images from the auction yard to prove it, so the second he put his name on that page while claiming he still owned them, it was over. He'd be signing his own downfall in ink, handing me the exact proof I needed and sealing the door behind himself. I printed the agreement. It felt substantial, thick, weighty, official. I clipped it into a blue folder, then I slid it into my briefcase beside the photos of the equipment he'd already sold. Next to the copy of the forged loan from 7 years ago, next to the photo of Evan Price signing as a witness, I was ready. Friday was 2 days away. I went home early. I picked up Maya from school and took her for ice cream. We sat on a bench in the park, watching other kids play on the swings. "Mom, you look happy," she said, licking a spoon of chocolate mint. "I am, baby," I said. "I am just finishing a really big project." "Is it a hard one?" she asked. "It was," I said, smoothing her hair. "It was the hardest one I have ever done, but I think I finally figured out the ending." She smiled, innocent and free, completely unaware that the man I was about to destroy was the grandfather she had never met, and I intended to keep it that way. She didn't need his name, she didn't need his money, and after Friday, she wouldn't even need to worry about his shadow. The sun went down, turning the sky a bruised purple. I held my daughter's hand and walked her home, knowing that in 48 hours, the balance of the universe was finally going to shift. The liability was coming home to collect, to catch a man like Warren Turner. You do not need a net, you need a mirror. You need to show him exactly what he wants to see, a reflection of himself as a powerful, respected businessman getting out of a jam, and he will walk right into the glass. I needed a face for this operation. I could not be the one to slide the paperwork across the table. If he saw me, the game would change from a business transaction to a family feud, and Warren knew how to win a feud. He would scream. He would gaslight. He would play the victim, but he did not know how to win against a wall. I hired Naomi Kessler. Naomi was not a television lawyer. She did not make grand speeches. She was a partner at a boutique firm in Pittsburgh that specialized in aggressive corporate restructuring. It required him to certify that no signatures had been falsified at any point in the company's history. It required him to itemize every asset he had moved or reassigned over the last 5 years. And then I added the trigger clause. Immediate default condition. She was 40, with silver hair cut into a bob so crisp it looked like it could slice paper. And she had a way of studying people that made them feel like they'd just failed an exam they didn't know they were sitting. I met her in her office 2 days before the meeting. I laid out the plan. I told her everything: the timeline, the forged documents, the phantom project in Ohio. She listened without blinking. She didn't offer pity. She didn't say, "Oh, poor you." She just tapped her pen against her legal pad. "So," Naomi said, her voice dry and exact, "you don't want a settlement. You want a full takedown." "I want a confession," I corrected, "and then I want the consequences to land." "Legally speaking," she said. "That's a distinction without a difference. If we build this the right way, he'll corner himself before he even realizes the door has closed." We spent the next 24 hours constructing the leverage. The leverage was a binder. It was 3 inches thick, bound in navy blue leather, with the words "Debt Restructuring and Forbearance Agreement" embossed in gold on the front. It looked expensive. It looked official. It looked like salvation. Inside that binder were 300 pages of dense, suffocating legal jargon. We did this on purpose. We packed the first 50 pages with standard definitions, boilerplates about jurisdiction, and meaningless clauses about interest rate calculations. We wanted to bore him. We wanted his eyes to glaze over. We wanted Clifford Vance to look at the weight of the document and think, "Standard institutional paperwork. We will just skim for the numbers." That is where the trap lay. Most people think the worst thing you can sign is a confession of judgment. That is a clause where you admit you owe the money and give up your right to a trial. It is bad, but it can be fought. Judges sometimes throw them out if they feel the borrower was coerced. I did not want a confession of judgment. I wanted something cleaner, something deadlier. Naomi drafted a stipulated judgment and waiver package. This is a different beast entirely. It is not just an admission of debt. It is a pre-negotiated court order. By signing it, Warren would be agreeing that a judgment had already been entered against him. He would be waiving his right to notice, his right to a hearing, his right to appeal, and his right to claim bankruptcy protection for this specific debt. It meant that the moment he breached even the tiniest clause of the agreement, we didn't have to sue him. We just had to walk the paper to the courthouse clerk, stamp it, and the sheriff would be at his door an hour later. But the real genius was in the truth certification. I had Naomi place this on page 112. It was buried deep in the middle of the representations and warranties section. It required the borrower, Warren, and his legal counsel, Vance, to certify 3 specific things under penalty of immediate acceleration of the debt. 1. That the borrower has never used a forged signature or a false identity to secure credit in the past. 2. That the borrower has not transferred, sold, or hidden any assets listed as collateral in the last 90 days. 3. That the financial statements provided to the lender are 100% accurate. I knew my father. I knew him better than he knew himself. He would see this page, and he wouldn't even read the text. He would see the word certification. He would think bureaucracy, and he would sign. He would think, who is going to check? Who knows about the forgery from 7 years ago? Who knows I sold the excavators last week? He thought he was invisible. He didn't know the lender was his daughter. "He will sign it," I told Naomi as we reviewed the final draft. He will be so focused on the $1.5 million disbursement that he won't care about the fine print. And if he lies? Naomi asked, though she already knew the answer. If he signs this page and he is lying, I said, then he isn't just defaulting on a loan. He is committing bank fraud. Again, but this time, he is doing it in a document that explicitly waives his right to defend himself. But I needed a physical trigger. A lie on paper is one thing. A theft of collateral is another. The loan I had bought, the one from Keystone Regional Bank, was secured by a fleet of heavy machinery. Specifically, 5 Caterpillar excavators and 3 bulldozers. According to the loan documents, these machines were sitting in a secure yard in Beaver County. Ready to work. They were not there. I knew this because I had hired a private investigator to drive past the yard 3 days ago. The yard was empty. My father had sold them. He had sold them for cash to a shady liquidator in West Virginia to make payroll last month. He had sold collateral that he did not own. Because the bank held the lien, that is a crime. It is called conversion of secured assets. So, we added a clause. Section 14. Paragraph B. The borrower affirms that all collateral listed in Schedule A is currently in the possession of the borrower and located at the primary storage facility. The borrower acknowledges that any absence of said collateral constitutes an immediate and incurable breach of this agreement. This was the landmine. The moment he signed the paper, he was stating he had the machines. Since he did not have the machines, he was in breach the second the ink dried. I wouldn't have to wait a month for a missed payment. I wouldn't have to wait for the Ohio project to fail. The trap would snap shut before he even left the parking garage. Friday came. I drove to Columbus in a rental car. I did not want my own license plate to be seen near the building. The meeting was at 2 o'clock. I arrived at noon. I set up the room myself. It was a corner suite in a glass tower, rented under the name Archway Holdings. It looked sterile and imposing, a long granite table, 12 black leather chairs, a view of the city that made everyone look like ants. I placed the binder at the head of the table. Next to it, I placed a single, expensive pen. Then, I set up the eye. I placed a laptop on the far end of the table. I angled it so the camera captured the entire room, the chairs where they would sit, the window, the door. I covered the tally light, the little light that turns on when the camera is active, with a tiny piece of black electrical tape. Then I used a pin to poke a microscopic hole in the tape, just enough for a sliver of green light to show, but only if you were looking for it. I opened a video conferencing app. I set it to auto-answer and muted the speakers. I was not going to be in the room. I was going to be in the suite next door, watching on my own screen. This was perfectly legal. It was my office. It was my meeting. The investor had a right to record the proceedings for compliance purposes, and frankly, even if it wasn't legal, I didn't care. I needed to see his face. I needed to see the moment he signed away his soul. Naomi walked in at 1:30. She looked immaculate. She wore a charcoal gray suit and glasses with thin wire frames. She carried a briefcase that looked like it contained nuclear codes. "Everything is ready," I said. She checked the laptop. She checked the binder. She checked the pen. "You should go," she said. "They will be here in 20 minutes. Warren Turner is a man who arrives early to establish dominance." "He is not dominant today," I said. "Today, he is dinner." I walked out of the conference room and into the adjacent office. I locked the door. I sat down in the dark and opened my laptop. The screen flickered to life. I saw the empty conference room in high definition. I saw the dust motes dancing in the sunbeams. I saw the trap waiting. I put on my headphones. The silence in the room was amplified in my ears. 10 minutes later, the door to the conference room opened. My heart hammered against my ribs. A frantic, bird-like rhythm. Warren Turner walked in. He looked older. That was my first thought. His hair was thinner, more white than gray now. His face was puffier, likely from stress and too much scotch, but he still walked with that chest-out swagger, that projection of absolute confidence that had fooled bankers for 40 years. He wore a navy suit that I recognized. He had bought it in Italy 10 years ago. It looked a little loose on him now. Behind him came Evan. My breath hitched. Seeing him on a screen was different than seeing a static photo. He looked tired. He looked heavy. He was carrying a stack of rolled-up blueprints, the fake plans for the Ohio River corridor. He looked nervous. His eyes darted around the room, checking the corners, checking the windows. He looked like a man who was waiting for the floor to drop out. And finally, Clifford Vance, the lawyer, the shield. He strode in like he owned the building. He was laughing at something he had just said, slapping Warren on the back. He placed his leather briefcase on the table with a heavy thud. "Nice view," Vance said. His voice came through my headphones crystal clear. "Institutional money always gets the best views." "Let's just get this done," Warren grumbled. He sounded hoarse. "I have suppliers waiting on checks. Did they wire the funds yet?" "Relax, Warren," Vance said, pulling out a chair. "We sign. They wire. That is how it works. I reviewed the term sheet. It is standard, a little high on the interest, but we can refinance in 6 months once the pre-sales start coming in." I watched them sit. Warren took the seat at the head of the table, directly in front of the binder. Evan sat to his right. Vance sat to his left. They were surrounding the trap. "Where is the rep?" Warren asked, looking at his watch. "It is 1:55. I hate waiting." "I am here." Naomi walked in. She didn't knock. She didn't smile. She just glided into the room and took the seat at the opposite end of the table. "Good afternoon. Gentlemen," she said, "I am Naomi Kessler, representing Wren Harbor Holdings." Vance stood up to shake her hand, flashing his politician smile. "Ms. Kessler, Clifford Vance. A pleasure. We appreciate you expediting this meeting." Naomi ignored his hand. She sat down and opened her own file. "We have a hard stop at 3 o'clock, she said. "The wire window closes at 4. My client requires executed documents in hand before we release the funds." "We are ready," Warren said, leaning forward. "We brought the plans for the corridor." "If you want to see the projections—" "I have seen the projections," Naomi cut him off. "My analysts have reviewed your numbers. We are satisfied with the risk profile." She lied so smoothly. She made it sound like we actually believed his fantasy. "Great," Warren said. "Then let's sign." Naomi pushed the blue binder toward him. "This is the restructuring agreement," she said. "It consolidates your 3 existing commercial notes into a single obligation held by Wren Harbor. It also authorizes the new capital injection of $1.5 million. Vance reached for the binder. "I will need to review this." "Of course," Naomi said. "However, as I said, we have a hard stop. The terms are identical to the summary sheet sent to your office yesterday. The only additions are standard representations and warranties required by our risk committee." Vance flipped open the binder. He saw the thickness. He saw the dense, single-spaced text. I watched his face. I saw the calculation. He knew he couldn't read 300 pages in an hour. He knew his client was desperate for the money. He did exactly what we predicted. He skipped the definitions. He skipped the jurisdiction clauses. He flipped to the back, looking for the numbers. "Interest rate, 8%, Vance muttered. "Term, 5 years. Balloon payment at the end. Okay, this looks correct." He flipped a few more pages. He stopped at the stipulated judgment section. "Whoa," Vance said. Section 9. "This is a stipulated judgment? That is aggressive, Ms. Kessler. Usually, we do a simple promissory note." "My client is buying distressed debt. Mr. Vance," Naomi said, her voice turning cold. "We are not a traditional bank. We are a special situations fund. We do not litigate. If there is a default, we execute. That is the condition of the capital. Take it or leave it." Vance hesitated. He looked at Warren. "Warren," Vance said softly. "This means if you miss a payment, they can take the assets without a trial. It is a heavy leash." Warren looked at the binder. Then he looked at Evan. "Evan," Warren said, "did the lumberyard call today?" "Twice," Evan said. His voice was weak. They said no more deliveries until the check clears. The crew is standing around doing nothing. Warren turned back to Vance. I don't plan on missing a payment. Cliff, once the disbursement hits, we are back in the black. We will sell the first 10 condos next month and pay this whole thing off. He was lying. There were no condos. But he had to keep the lie going. I can't advise you to sign a stipulated judgment, Vance said, covering his own liability. I am signing, Warren said. Give me the pen. He grabbed the pen. Wait, Naomi said. Before you sign the signature page, you must execute the certification of truth on page 112, and Mr. Vance, as corporate counsel, you must attest to it. Vance flipped back to page 112. I held my breath. This was it. The truth certification. Vance scanned it quickly. Certify no prior forgery. Certify asset list is accurate. Certify financial solvency. He shrugged. Standard compliance reps. He didn't know. He didn't know about the forgery because Warren had never told him, and he didn't check the assets because he was lazy. It is just a formality. Warren, Vance said. Sign here. Warren Turner did not read a single word of the page. He just saw the line for his name. He signed it with a flourish, a big, looping signature. The same hand that had forged my name 7 years ago was now signing his own death warrant. And the asset schedule, Naomi said. You are confirming the excavators and bulldozers are currently in your possession? Yes, Warren said, waving his hand impatiently. They are in the yard. Can we get the money now? He signed the asset schedule. He had just committed perjury and fraud in front of a webcam. Mr. Price, Naomi said, looking at Evan. You are the project manager. You need to witness the asset verification. Evan froze. He looked at Warren. Warren glared at him. Sign the damn paper. Evan, Warren snapped. Evan picked up the pen. His hand was shaking. I saw it. I saw the tremor. He knew the machines were gone. He knew they had been sold. But he was too weak to stand up to my father. He signed. And Mr. Vance, Naomi said. Your attestation? Vance signed his name next to theirs. He verified that he had done his due diligence. He hadn't. Naomi took the binder back. She checked the signatures. She closed the cover with a soft thud. Thank you, gentlemen, she said. The documents are executed. The wire? Warren asked. When does it hit? Naomi looked at her watch. Then she looked directly at the laptop camera. She looked right at me. The wire is not coming. Mr. Turner, she said. The room went silent. Excuse me, Warren said, a nervous laugh bubbling up. What do you mean? We just signed. You signed a stipulated judgment based on a certification of assets, Naomi said calmly. However, under Section 14, Paragraph B, the absence of collateral triggers an immediate default. She pulled a folder from her briefcase. She slid a glossy photograph across the table. It was a picture of the Turner Ridge Equipment Yard. Taken yesterday, it was completely empty. We know you sold the excavators to Miller Surplus in West Virginia last Tuesday, Naomi said. We have the bill of sale. Warren's face went gray. The color just drained out of him like someone had pulled a plug. So, Naomi continued, you have just certified, in writing, that you possess assets you do not have. That is a fraudulent representation, which means you are currently in default of the agreement you signed 30 seconds ago. This is a trick, Vance shouted. Jumping up, this is entrapment. It is not a trick, Naomi said. It is a contract, and you just advised your client to sign it. Who are you? Warren whispered. He wasn't looking at Naomi anymore. He was looking around the room, sensing a presence he couldn't see. Who is Wren Harbor? Naomi stood up. She walked to the door of the conference room. She unlocked it. I am just the lawyer, she said. The investor would like a word. She opened the door. I stood in the doorway. I was wearing a white coat, crisp and clean, a sharp contrast to the snowy rags I had worn the last time he saw me. I walked into the room. The click of my heels on the floor was the only sound in the world. I stopped at the end of the table. Warren looked at me. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked like he was seeing a ghost. Evan dropped his pen. It clattered on the glass table. Vance looked between us, confused, trying to connect the dots. "Hello, Dad," I said. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." I reached out and placed my hand on the blue binder. "You stole my name," I said. "Now I own yours." I sat in the darkened office next door, the blue light of the laptop screen reflecting in my eyes, through the tiny pinhole camera I had hidden in the conference room. I watched the door open. Warren Turner walked in first. He entered with the swagger of a man who believed the universe existed solely to bail him out. He was 62 years old, and from a distance, he still looked like the titan of Cedar Bluff real estate. But the camera sees everything. The high-definition lens zoomed in on the details he tried to hide. His suit, a bespoke charcoal wool that used to fit him like armor, was hanging loose around his shoulders. He had lost weight, the kind of unhealthy, rapid weight loss that comes from sleepless nights and skipped meals. His neck looked thin inside the starch of his collar, but his chin was up. He scanned the room, checking the view, checking the furniture, assessing the value of the environment before he even looked at the people. He was projecting success because he had nothing else left to sell. Behind him came Evan Price. My heart gave a single, painful thud against my ribs. But I forced myself to breathe through it. Evan looked haunted. He was carrying a heavy leather satchel, likely filled with the architectural drawings for the Ohio River corridor, the drawings for the buildings that would never exist. He did not strut. He shuffled. He kept his head down, his eyes darting toward the floor tiles. At one point, he glanced up toward the far end of the table, right at the laptop where I was watching. He held the gaze for a fraction of a second, then flinched away, as if the black lens was accusing him. He sat down quickly, pulling his chair close to the table, trying to make himself small. He looked like a man who knew he was walking through a minefield but was too cowardly to stop. They sat in silence for 5 minutes. Warren tapped his fingers on the granite table. A nervous, staccato rhythm. Evan stared at his hands. Then, the door opened again. Clifford Vance breezed in. He was 5 minutes late. A calculated move to show that his time was the most expensive commodity in the room. He looked flush, his cheeks red from the cold, or perhaps from a lunchtime martini. He tossed his coat onto an empty chair and flashed a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Sorry for the delay, gentlemen," Vance said, his voice booming through my headphones. "I had to wrap up a call with the zoning board. Just keeping the sharks at bay." He was lying. I knew for a fact he had been at his own bank, begging for an extension on his overdraft protection. I had the alert on my phone. Warren looked at him with desperate relief. "Is everything set? Cliff? Do they have the wire ready?" Vance sat down and opened his briefcase, pulling out a gold fountain pen. He looked at Naomi, who was sitting at the head of the table like a statue made of ice and judgment. "Ms. Kessler," Vance said, nodding to her, "let us see this miracle agreement." Naomi slid the blue binder across the table. It made a heavy sound, the sound of a prison door closing, though they did not know it yet. Vance opened it. He flipped through the pages with the practiced speed of a lawyer who gets paid by the hour, but bills by the outcome. He hummed to himself. Restructuring of 3 commercial notes. He muttered, "Assignment of debt to Wren Harbor Holdings. Capital injection of $1.5 million. He paused. He frowned. He looked at the interest rate page. 8%? Vance asked, looking up at Naomi. "That is below market for a distressed asset. Why are you being so generous?" Naomi did not blink. "We are not a bank, Mr. Vance," she said smoothly. "We are equity partners. We want the Ohio River corridor to succeed. Gouging you on interest does not help us get our principal back. We need you solvent." Vance nodded slowly. It made sense to him. Greed always makes sense to men like him, if the deal was too good. He assumed it was because he was brilliant, not because he was being bailed. He flipped to the back. He glanced at the stipulated judgment section. "This is tight." "Warren," Vance warned, pointing to a paragraph. "If you sneeze wrong, they own the company." "I don't plan on sneezing," Warren snapped. "Just tell me where to sign. I need that wire to hit before the suppliers leave the site for the weekend." Vance shrugged. He had done his job. He had offered a token warning. Now he just wanted his retainer fee, which he assumed would be paid out of the new funds. He turned to page 112, the truth certification. I leaned forward in my chair in the dark room. This was the moment. "Here is the certification," Vance said, tapping the paper. "You are confirming the asset list is current. The excavators, the dozers, the land titles. Everything is exactly where you said it is. It is all there," Warren said. He didn't even look at the page. He was staring at the blank check he imagined was waiting for him. "Sign it," Vance said. Warren Turner picked up the pen. He signed his name. He signed it with force, the ink dark and permanent. "Evan," Vance said, sliding the binder to the right. "Witness signature." Evan looked at Warren. For a second, I saw hesitation. Evan knew. He knew the machines were gone. He knew they were sold to a liquidator in West Virginia. He knew that signing this was perjury. "Sign it," Warren hissed. Evan swallowed hard. He picked up the pen. He signed. "And you?" "Counselor," Naomi said, looking at Vance. "We need your attestation as officer of the court." Vance laughed. A short, arrogant bark. "I will sign anything that gets this deal done." He signed. It was finished. I watched Naomi take the binder back. She checked the signatures one by one. She ran her finger over the wet ink. Then she closed the binder. She looked at her watch. "It is done," she said. "The wire?" Warren asked, half rising from his chair. Naomi ignored him. She looked at the camera. She looked right at me. "Come in," she said. Warren frowned. "Who are you talking to?" The door to the conference room opened. I stood up from my desk in the adjacent room. I smoothed the front of my white blazer. It was a stark, blinding white, chosen specifically because it was the opposite of the gray. Dirty slush I had walked through the night I left. I took a breath. The air in my lungs felt cold and clean. I walked into the hallway. I turned the handle. I pushed the door open. The three men turned to look. For a moment, there was only silence. The kind of silence that happens when a bomb drops but hasn't exploded yet. Warren stared at me. He squinted, as if trying to adjust his eyes. He saw a woman in a $2,000 suit. He saw a woman with hair cut in a sharp, professional style. He saw a woman who radiated power, and then he saw the eyes. "Lydia?" he whispered. The name hung in the air like smoke. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Confusion washed over his face, followed quickly by a dawn of realization. And then, instinctively, he reached for the mask he always wore, the mask of the benevolent patriarch. "Lydia," he said, his voice cracking into a fake, jovial tone. "My God, is that you? We didn't know you were. Are you working for Wren Harbor?" He took a step toward me, his arms opening slightly, as if he expected a hug, as if 7 years of silence and financial abuse could be erased by a smile. I did not move. I did not smile. I did not flinch. I just looked at him. I looked at Evan. He had turned a ghostly shade of pale. He had shrunk back in his chair, his hands gripping the armrest so hard his knuckles were white. He couldn't look at me. He was staring at the floor, terrified. And Vance? Vance was looking between me and the binder, his lawyer brain frantically trying to calculate the exposure. Warren stopped. My lack of reaction froze him. He lowered his arms. "Lydia, honey," he stammered, pivoting to the role of the misunderstood father. "Look, I know things ended. Badly. I know I was hard on you, but I did it for your own good. I wanted you to be tough. And look at you. You are successful. You are working for a major fund. I knew you had it in you." He was trying to claim credit for my survival. It was so classic, so Warren Turner, that I almost laughed. I walked past him. I walked to the head of the table. I stood next to Naomi. I do not work for Wren Harbor. Warren, I said. My voice was calm, lower than he remembered, stripped of any daughterly pleading. He blinked. What? But the meeting. I own Wren Harbor. I said. The silence returned. Heavier this time. I own Wren Harbor Holdings. I continued. Which means I own the 3 notes you just consolidated. Which means I own the mortgage on this lawyer's office building. And as of 10 seconds ago, I reached into my bag, I pulled out a manila folder, I opened it and took out a single glossy photograph. I slid it across the granite table. It stopped right in front of Warren. It was a high-resolution drone shot of his equipment yard in Beaver County. The mud was churning, the gates were open, and the yard was empty. No yellow iron, no excavators, no bulldozers, just empty, wet dirt. I watched his eyes drop to the photo. I watched the blood drain from his face until he looked like gray putty, and I watched the moment he realized that I knew. We tracked the serial numbers. I said, "You sold 5 Caterpillar excavators to Miller Surplus in West Virginia last Tuesday. You received a cash payment of $210,000. You used that money to pay a gambling debt in Atlantic City and to cover the lease on your Mercedes." I looked at Evan. "And you, Evan, you signed the bill of lading. We have your signature on the transfer receipt." Evan made a small, choking sound. Naomi spoke up then. Her voice was like a gavel striking wood. "Gentlemen," she said, "you have just signed a truth certification stating that the collateral is currently in your possession. You have certified this to induce my client to release funds. Since the collateral is gone, that certification is false." She tapped the blue binder. "Under Section 14, Paragraph B of the document you just executed, a false certification triggers an immediate default. There is no grace period. There is no cure period. The entire debt, $520,000, is due and payable immediately." Warren looked up. He looked trapped. He looked at Vance. "Cliff, do something." Vance was staring at me. He wasn't looking at the contract anymore. He was looking at me with fear. He realized that if I owned Wren Harbor, I owned his mortgage, and he had just advised his client to sign a fraudulent document in front of his own creditor. I didn't know about the excavators." Vance stammered. "I relied on the client's word. You signed the attestation." "Clifford," I said, "you certified due diligence. You didn't do it." I turned back to my father. He was trembling. For the first time in his life, the great Warren Turner was shaking. "But the money," he whispered, "the $1.5 million. We signed. You have to wire it." I leaned over the table. I placed my hands flat on the granite. I looked him dead in the eye. "There is no money." "Warren," I said, "there never was." His mouth fell open. "But why? Why go through all this? Why buy the debt?" He genuinely didn't understand. He thought in terms of profit and loss. He couldn't compute a transaction based on justice. I reached into the binder. I flipped it open to the signature page. I pointed to his signature. 7 years ago. "You sat at a dinner table and told me I was a liability." I said, "You told me I was worth nothing because my credit score was ruined. A score you ruined. You stole my name. You forged my signature. You made me into a ghost so you could buy another 6 months of pretending to be a big shot." I paused. I let the memory of the snow and the cold wash over me, fueling my voice. "You thought you could throw me away." I said, "You thought I would disappear. But liabilities do not disappear. Dad, they accumulate interest." I picked up the photo of the empty yard and held it up. "I did not come here to invest in your company." I said, "I did not come here to save you." I dropped the photo back onto the table. "I bought your debt so I could stand here and watch you sign your own confession. I wanted it on paper. I wanted you to admit, in writing, that you are a fraud." Warren stared at me. His eyes were wet. He looked small. He looked old. "Lydia, please," he rasped. "I am your father. You can't destroy me. I built this. I built everything." "You built nothing," I said. "You borrowed everything. You borrowed money you couldn't pay back. You borrowed a reputation you didn't earn. And you borrowed my life to cover your mistakes. I stood up straight. I buttoned my white blazer. Naomi, I said, execute the judgment. Naomi pulled a cell phone from her pocket. She dialed a number. Sheriff's Department? She said into the phone. Yes. We have a stipulated judgment and confession ready for filing. We are requesting immediate asset seizure of the Turner Ridge accounts. Yes. We have the location of the secondary accounts as well. Evan put his head in his hands and started to sob. It was a pathetic, wet sound. Vance was frantically typing on his phone, likely trying to transfer his own assets before I came for his building. Warren just stood there. He looked at the blue binder. He looked at the pen. He looked at me. You can't do this, he whispered. I already did, I said. I turned toward the door. I didn't need to stay. I had seen what I came to see. I had seen the fear. I had seen the realization. Wait, Warren shouted. He lunged forward, grabbing the edge of the table. You bought the company. You are the owner. You have to protect the asset. If you sink me, you lose your investment. He was still trying to negotiate. He still thought this was business. I stopped at the door. I turned back one last time. I looked at the man who had kicked a pregnant girl out into a blizzard. You are confused. Warren, I said. I pointed at the blue binder, at the evidence of his lies, at the wreckage of his ego. I didn't buy your company. I said, I bought your lie. And now, I am closing the account. I walked out. I didn't slam the door. I closed it gently, with a soft click that sounded like the final beat of a heart that had stopped beating a long time ago. The silence that followed my exit lasted less than 3 seconds. I had barely turned the handle of the conference room door when the explosion happened. It wasn't physical. It was the sound of a desperate animal realizing the cage was locked. You cannot walk away from this. It was Clifford Vance. He had launched himself out of his chair, his expensive leather loafers skidding on the polished floor. He moved with a speed I did not think he possessed, scrambling around the table to block my path. He stood between me and the exit, his chest heaving, his face a mottled map of red rage and white panic. This is entrapment! Lydia! He shouted, pointing a shaking finger at my face. This entire meeting is a sham. You induced my client to sign a confession under false pretenses. You promised capital injection. You acted in bad faith. This is the definition of duress. He was sweating. I could see a bead of perspiration rolling down his temple, getting caught in his gray sideburns. He was trying to summon the thunder he used in courtrooms, but in this room, without a judge to perform for. He just looked terrified. I will have this stipulated judgment thrown out before the ink is dry. Vance spat. Stepping closer, I will file an emergency motion for vacatur. I will sue you for fraud in the inducement. I will bury Iron Wren Capital in so much litigation that you will be bankrupt before you see a dime of those assets. I stopped. I looked at him. I did not step back. Are you finished? Clifford? I asked. My voice was quiet, almost bored. No, I am not finished, he yelled, his spit flying. You think you can play in the big leagues because you bought some bad paper? I have been practicing law in this state for 30 years. I know every judge in the circuit. I will paint you as a vindictive, estranged daughter trying to destroy a legitimate business. I will make you look like a predator. Warren was standing behind him now, nodding, clutching at the hope that his lawyer could still bark him out of this corner. Yeah, Warren said, his voice trembling but gaining strength from Vance's anger. You heard him. Lydia, you messed with the wrong people. You can't just trick us. I looked at Vance. I looked at the way his tie was slightly crooked. I looked at the fear vibrating behind his eyes. He was threatening me because he had no other cards to play. He was bluffing with an empty hand, but I wasn't. I reached into the inner pocket of my white blazer. I pulled out a second envelope. It was smaller than the blue binder. It was a standard legal envelope, crisp and white. I held it up. You talk a lot about litigation, Clifford. I said, you talk a lot about burying me, but lawsuits cost money, and offices cost money, and mortgages. Well, Mortgages are very strict about payment schedules. Vance frowned. What are you talking about? I pushed the envelope against his chest. He grabbed it instinctively. Open it, I said. He hesitated. He looked at the envelope, then at me. His hands were shaking so bad he had trouble tearing the flap. He ripped it open. He pulled out the document inside. It was a single page, a notice of assignment of mortgage. I watched his eyes scan the header. I watched him read the property address. 400 Liberty Avenue, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The address of the Vance Legal Group headquarters. The building he had renovated. The building that was his pride and joy. Then I watched him read the line that mattered. Assignee, Archway Holdings, a wholly owned subsidiary of Iron Wren Capital. The color did not just drain from his face. It vanished. He turned a shade of gray that looked like wet ash. He looked like he was going to be sick. I took a step closer to him. I lowered my voice so that only he could hear me. I wanted this to be intimate. I wanted Warren to see the shift, but not hear the kill command. I own your building. Clifford, I whispered, I bought your note 3 days ago. You are 45 days past due. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. I know about the equity stripping. I continued, my voice hard and low. I know you used the refinancing money to cover your personal debts. And I know you just signed a transparency clause that you violated the moment you picked up that pen. I nodded toward the blue binder on the table. So here's the situation. I can foreclose on your law office tomorrow. I can lock the doors. I can seize your files. I can report you to the Bar Association for signing a fraudulent certification. I can end your career by Monday morning. Vance made a small, strangulated noise in his throat. Or, I said, leaning in until I could smell the martini on his breath. You can remember who you actually work for. I locked eyes with him. You have a choice to make right now. Clifford, you can protect him. I jerked my head toward Warren. Or you can protect your office. You cannot save both. Vance looked over my shoulder at Warren. Warren was watching us, confused, trying to read the silence. Cliff? Warren asked, his voice wavering. What is that? What is she showing you? Vance looked back at me. He looked at the document in his hand. He looked at the future of his firm, crumbling in his grasp. It wasn't even a choice. Men like Clifford Vance do not have loyalty. They have interests, and his interest was self-preservation. He took a step back from me. He folded the paper and put it in his pocket. He smoothed his suit jacket. He took a deep breath. Mr. Turner, Vance said. His voice was different now. It was hollow. It was formal. Warren blinked. Mr. Turner? Why are you calling me that? Cliff, what is going on? Vance did not look at Warren. He looked at the floor. I cannot represent you in this matter anymore. Vance said. Warren froze. What? There is a conflict of interest, Vance mumbled. The terms of the judgment you signed are valid. You admitted to the asset list. The assets are missing. You are in default. Warren's face twisted in horror. Cliff, what are you saying? You just said we could sue. You said it was entrapment. My advice has changed, Vance said, still looking at the floor. You signed the confession. Warren, it is binding. There is nothing I can do. I have to recuse myself. He grabbed his briefcase from the table. He didn't look at Evan. He didn't look at Warren. He walked past me, head down, like a dog that had been kicked. He opened the door and walked out, leaving his client, his friend of 20 years, standing alone in the wreckage. Warren watched the door close. He looked like he had been punched in the gut. He turned to me, his eyes wide with betrayal. You bought him, he whispered. You bought my lawyer. I didn't buy him, I said coldly. I just reminded him that he has bills to pay too. Warren staggered back and collapsed into his chair. The fight was gone. The bluster was gone. He looked at the empty seat where his defender used to be. Then he looked at me. Lydia, he said. His voice was cracked, broken. I walked back to the table. I stood over him. Why are you doing this? He asked. Tears were actually gathering in his eyes now. Real tears? Fake tears? With him. It was impossible to tell. I am your father. Doesn't that mean anything? I raised you. I fed you. I gave you a home for 24 years. You gave me a roof. I corrected. And then you kicked me out from under it when I became inconvenient. I made a mistake, he pleaded. I was angry. I was under pressure. The business was failing even then. I didn't know what I was doing. You knew exactly what you were doing. I said, you didn't just kick me out. You erased me. You stole my credit. You stole my name. Do you know what it is like to sleep in a car in January because your own name is toxic? Do you know what it is like to be rejected for a rental because of loans you never took? I would have paid them back, he stammered. I intended to pay them back. Intention is not currency. Warren, I said, please. He begged. We are family. You can't destroy your own family. I am still your dad. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had taught me to ride a bike. Yes, but I also looked at the man who had forged my signature while I was eating his Christmas dinner. A father does not steal his daughter's name. I said, a father protects his child. You used me as a shield. You used me as a human shield for your greed, and now the shield is hitting back. Warren put his head in his hands, and then a sound cut through the room. It was a laugh. A short, dry, ugly laugh. I turned. Evan Price was smiling. He was still sitting in his chair, but the cowering posture was gone. He was leaning back, his arms crossed, a look of twisted satisfaction on his face. It was the smile of a man who realized the boat was sinking. So he might as well set fire to the sails. He looked at Warren, sobbing into his hands, and then he looked at me. You are tough. Lydia, Evan said, I will give you that. You really cornered the old man, bought the debt, bought the lawyer. Very Count of Monte Cristo. He reached down to his leather satchel. But you forgot one thing. He said, you were so focused on the money, you forgot about the biology. He pulled out a file. It wasn't a blueprint, it was a legal file. I frowned. What is that? Evan tossed the file onto the table. It slid across the granite and stopped next to the blue binder. That, Evan said, his voice dripping with malice, is a petition for emergency temporary custody. The air in the room seemed to vanish. My blood went cold. Not the cold of calculation, but the cold of primal fear. Custody? I whispered. Of Maya. Evan said. He said her name casually, like he was ordering a sandwich. My daughter. He stood up. He wasn't the scared employee anymore. He was playing his own ace. You see, Lydia, while you were playing banker, I was doing some research too. I know you are single. I know you work 100-hour weeks. I know you live in a rented apartment in the city. He tapped the file. This petition alleges that you are unstable. It alleges that your obsession with revenge against your father demonstrates a lack of fitness to parent. It details how you dragged a minor child through poverty and homelessness while you were pursuing a vendetta. He grinned. It was a shark's grin. And since I am the biological father, acknowledged on the birth certificate, thanks to your honesty, I have rights. I am filing this today. I am asking for full temporary custody pending a psychological evaluation of the mother. You haven't seen her in 7 years. I said. My voice was shaking. I hated that it was shaking. You abandoned us. You signed away your rights when you took that job. I never signed away my rights. Evan said, I just gave you space. But now I am a concerned father. I have a steady job. I have a stable home. And you? You are a corporate raider with a grudge. He looked at Warren. And Warren here. Grandpa Warren. He is going to testify. He is going to testify that you have been harassing the family, that you are mentally unwell. Warren looked up. He looked at Evan, then at me. I saw the calculation in his eyes. He saw a lifeline. If Evan took Maya, they had leverage. They could trade the child for the debt. I would testify. Warren stammered. If it helps. For the good of the child. I felt a wave of nausea. They were going to use my daughter. They were going to use Maya as a bargaining chip in a business deal. You are disgusting. I said, maybe. Evan shrugged. But I am also represented. He pulled a folded check from his pocket. He held it up. "I retained Marvin Gold," he said proudly. "Marvin Gold. I knew the name. He was the nastiest, most expensive family law attorney in Columbus. A man who specialized in destroying mothers. He costs $500 an hour." Evan said, "And he requires an $18,000 retainer up front." Evan waved the check. "I dropped this off at his office this morning. The retainer is paid. He is filing the motion right now. By tonight, you might have a sheriff at your door coming to pick up Maya." Evan leaned over the table. "So here is the deal. Lydia, you tear up that confession. You forgive the debt. You walk away. And maybe I withdraw the petition. Maybe I let you keep her." He thought he had won. He thought he had found the one thing I valued more than justice. And he was right about that. I would burn the money to save Maya. But he was wrong about the timing. I looked at the check in his hand. I looked at the bank logo on the corner. It was a personal check drawn on a joint account. I looked at Naomi. Naomi was checking her phone. She looked up. She didn't look worried. She looked bored. "What time did you drop off the check?" "Evan?" Naomi asked. Evan frowned. "What, about 10 this morning? Why? And what time is it now?" Naomi asked. "It is 2:30. Evan said. "What does that matter? Gold is already working." I looked at Evan. I let a small, cold smile touch my lips. "Did you use your own money?" "Evan?" I asked. Evan scoffed. "I am the project manager. I have a salary. But did you use your own money?" I repeated. "Or did you use the bonus Warren gave you last week? The bonus that came from the sale of the excavators?" Evan went still. "That money was deposited into your account at First National." I said, "The account ending in 4492. Evan blinked. How do you know my account number?" "Because we traced the funds." I said, "When Warren sold the stolen excavators, he transferred $20,000 to you. That is proceeds of crime." "Evan, that is money laundering." I looked at Naomi. She nodded. 6 minutes ago," Naomi said, reading from her screen. "We filed the confession of judgment electronically. The moment the clerk stamped it, the automatic asset freeze was triggered." She looked at Evan. "The freeze covers the corporate accounts of Turner Ridge, the personal accounts of Warren Turner, and any known accounts that received fraudulent transfers." Evan's hand dropped. The check fluttered in his fingers. "We flagged your account ending in 4492 as a recipient of stolen collateral proceeds." I said. Naomi looked at Evan with pity. "The freeze order hit the banking system at 2:24 p.m., she said. "It is now 2:32. Evan stared at the check. "Marvin Gold does not work on credit." "Evan," I said softly, "when his office tries to deposit that check this afternoon, it is going to bounce. It is going to bounce so hard it will crack the ceiling." Evan turned pale. "But I gave it to him. He is filing. He won't file anything until the check clears." I said, "That is how lawyers like Gold work. He will get the notification of insufficient funds in about an hour, and then he will drop you." I took a step toward him. "You bet against me, Evan, but you bet with money that didn't belong to you. And now, you don't have a lawyer, you don't have a retainer, and you just admitted to conspiracy to commit fraud in front of a witness." Evan looked at the custody file on the table. It was useless. It was a pile of paper with no power behind it. He had tried to checkmate me, but he hadn't realized I had already cleared the board. I picked up the custody file. I flipped through it. It was garbage. Lies and slander. I ripped it in half. The sound of the tearing paper was loud in the quiet room. "You will never come near my daughter," I said, tossing the torn pieces onto the table. "If you ever try to file a paper against me again, I will have you prosecuted for the signature you put on that asset schedule. I will put you in prison. Evan, do you understand me?" Evan collapsed back into his chair. He looked at Warren. Warren looked away. They were both drowning now, and there were no lifeboats left. I turned to Naomi. "Finish it," I said. Naomi picked up her phone. "The accounts are frozen," she said. "The sheriff is en route to the site to secure the remaining physical assets." She looked at Warren. "You have 24 hours to vacate the premises of Turner Ridge Development. The locks will be changed tomorrow at noon." I looked at my father one last time. He was slumped in his chair, a king without a kingdom, a father without a daughter. You called me a liability. I said, I picked up my bag. You were right. I am a liability. I am your liability. And I just cost you everything. I walked out of the room. This time, nobody stopped me. This time, nobody shouted. I walked down the hallway to the elevator. I pressed the button. My hands were finally starting to shake, the adrenaline crashing out of my system. The doors opened. I stepped inside. As the doors closed, I saw Evan Price sitting with his head in his hands, holding a check that was worth less than the paper it was printed on, and I saw Warren Turner staring blankly at the wall. Realizing that the winter he had sent me into 7 years ago had finally come for him. The legal system is a machine. It does not care about your feelings. It does not care about your history. And it certainly does not care about your tears. It runs on two things: paper and procedure. If you feed the machine the right paper at the right time, you can crush a man without ever raising your voice. Evan Price thought he had checkmated me. He thought that by filing an emergency petition for custody, he could force me to trade my financial victory for my daughter. It was a brutal, ugly tactic, the kind that usually works on mothers who are terrified and underfunded. But Evan made a fatal calculation error. He assumed the machine worked instantly. He assumed that just because he handed a check to a lawyer, the lawyer would march into court and breathe fire for him. He was wrong. Marvin Gold, the shark Evan had hired, was expensive for a reason. He was not a crusader. He was a mercenary. And mercenaries do not fight until the gold is in the wagon. When I left the conference room, I didn't go home to cry. I went straight to war. Naomi and I drove to her office, and we started printing. Evan was trying to paint a picture of an unstable, vindictive woman. I needed to paint a picture of a fortress. We compiled what Naomi called the stability package. It was not a legal argument. It was a data dump. It contained 7 years of Maya's life, every report card, every vaccination record, every dental appointment receipt, a letter from her teacher praising her focus, a letter from the landlord in Braddock confirming I had never missed a rent payment, even when I was eating instant noodles, while Evan was waiting for his bounce check to clear. I was electronically filing a motion to quash and counter petition for sole custody with the family court clerk. We requested an emergency hearing not to defend me, but to expose him. We cited imminent risk of psychological harm and abuse of process for financial extortion. The court granted us a slot at 9 o'clock the next morning. I walked into the Family Division Courthouse 20 minutes early. It was a depressing building, full of people having the worst days of their lives. I wore the same white suit I had worn to the trap meeting. I wanted them to remember who I was. Warren and Evan arrived 10 minutes later. They looked awful. Warren was wearing a different suit, but his face was gray. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. Evan looked even worse. He was pacing, checking his phone constantly. I saw him arguing with a man in the hallway. That had to be Marvin Gold. Gold was short, aggressive, and currently looking at his phone with a deep frown. I walked past them. I didn't say a word. I just pushed through the double doors into courtroom 4. The judge was a woman named Honorable Judge Reynolds. She had a reputation for being impatient with drama. That was good for me. When the bailiff called our case, we stood up. Marvin Gold stepped forward. He looked annoyed. I guessed that his accounting department had just flagged him about the hold on Evan's funds. Your Honor, Gold started, his voice booming. We are here on an emergency petition. My client, Mr. Price, is the biological father of the minor child. He has been systematically excluded from the child's life by the mother, Ms. Turner. We have reason to believe Ms. Turner is engaging in an unstable vendetta against her own family. Using the child as a weapon, we are asking for immediate temporary custody to protect the child's welfare. Judge Reynolds looked over her glasses at me. Ms. Kessler? She asked. Naomi stood up. She was calm, precise, the antithesis of Gold's bluster. Your Honor, this petition is not about the child. This petition is a negotiating tactic for a failed business deal. Mr. Price has not seen the child in 7 years. He has not paid a dime of child support. He has not sent a birthday card. He is here today because yesterday afternoon, his employer, the grandfather, Warren Turner, signed a confession of judgment for a fraudulent loan, and they are trying to use the child to leverage a settlement. Objection, Gold shouted. That is speculation and irrelevant to family court. Is it? Naomi asked. She held up a USB drive. We have evidence, Your Honor. A recording taken yesterday in a business meeting between the parties. The judge raised an eyebrow. A recording? Was there an expectation of privacy? It was recorded in my client's office, during a commercial transaction, with full notice of compliance monitoring. Naomi said, It is admissible. Play it. The judge said. Naomi plugged the drive into the court's AV system. The audio filled the room. It was crystal clear. First, there was the sound of chairs scraping. Then, Warren Turner's voice. We need leverage. Evan, she has us on the money. We need to hit her where it hurts. Then Evan's voice. I can file for custody. Claim she is crazy. If we threaten to take the kid, she will drop the debt. Then Warren again. Do it. Use the kid to squeeze her. Dirty her up. Make her look like a liability. The silence in the courtroom after the recording stopped was absolute. Judge Reynolds looked at Evan Price. Her expression was not one of judicial neutrality anymore. It was one of disgust. Mr. Price, the judge said, her voice dangerously quiet. Did you just admit on tape to filing a custody petition solely to squeeze the mother in a financial dispute? Evan stammered. He looked at Gold. Gold took a step away from him. Your Honor, Gold said, holding up his hands, I was not aware of this recording. I was not aware of the context of this petition. You are aware now. Counselor, the judge snapped. But we weren't done, Your Honor, Naomi continued. We also need to address the credibility of the grandfather, Mr. Warren Turner, who is listed as the primary character witness for Mr. Price. Warren stiffened. He looked at me with hate in his eyes. Mr. Turner claims my client is unstable, Naomi said. However, we have a sworn affidavit filed this morning from Mr. Clifford Vance, Mr. Turner's former legal counsel. This was the twist. Warren gasped. Vance had sent it over late last night. He had chosen to save his building. He had thrown Warren to the wolves to keep me from foreclosing on his law firm. Naomi handed the document to the bailiff. In this affidavit, Naomi said, Mr. Vance admits that Mr. Turner knowingly signed a fraudulent truth certification yesterday regarding commercial assets. Furthermore, Mr. Vance has provided emails from 7 years ago, recovered from his archives, where Mr. Turner explicitly discusses forging his daughter's signature on loan documents to hide debt. Naomi turned to look at Warren. A man who forges his own daughter's name and commits fraud in a commercial contract cannot be trusted to testify about that daughter's fitness as a mother. The judge read the affidavit. She flipped the pages. She looked at Warren Turner. Mr. Turner, the judge said, is this true? Did you forge your daughter's signature? Warren tried to stand up. He looked like he was vibrating. I did what I had to do for the family, he shouted. She was a liability. She was ruining me. Sit down, the bailiff barked. Judge Reynolds took off her glasses. She looked at Evan, then at Warren. I have sat on this bench for 12 years, she said. I have seen messy divorces. I have seen angry parents. But I have never seen two men try to barter a 7-year-old girl like a poker chip to cover up a bank fraud. She banged her gavel. It sounded like a gunshot. Petition for temporary custody is denied with prejudice. The current status quo is frozen. Ms. Turner retains full sole physical and legal custody. Mr. Price, you are hereby restrained from coming within 500 feet of the child or the mother. She turned to Marvin Gold and Counselor. I suggest you review your client's ability to pay, because if this petition was filed in bad faith, I will be entertaining a motion for sanctions and attorney fees against your firm. Gold turned to Evan. His face was purple. Is the check good? Evan? Gold hissed. He didn't care about the judge anymore. He cared about his retainer. Is the money in the account? Evan looked down. He couldn't speak. He knew the freeze had hit. He knew the check was bouncing right now. I, Evan stuttered. Gold threw his file onto the table. Your Honor, Gold said, I am moving to withdraw as counsel immediately. My retainer has failed to materialize. Granted, the judge said. Get out of my courtroom. Gold walked out without looking back. Evan stood there, alone. He looked at Warren. Warren was staring at the table, his hands shaking uncontrollably. It was over. The chess match was over. I had taken their king, their queen, and their pawns. I stood up. I felt light. I felt clean. Thank you, Your Honor. I said. Naomi and I walked out of the courtroom. We didn't run. We didn't gloat. We walked with the steady, heavy rhythm of people who had just finished a very long, very dirty job. I stopped in the hallway. I waited. A minute later, Evan and Warren came out. They stopped when they saw me. Evan looked like a child who had been scolded. He looked at me, and for a second, I saw the boy I used to love. But that boy was dead. He had died the day he signed that witness line. Lydia, Evan whispered. I didn't mean it. Warren made me. I looked at him. You are a grown man. Evan, I said, nobody makes you do anything. You chose. You chose the money, and now you don't have the money, and you don't have the girl. I turned to Warren. He was leaning against the wall, trying to loosen his tie. He looked like he was having trouble breathing. He looked at me. There was no anger left in his eyes, just fear. Pure, naked fear. He realized that the silence he had bought for 7 years was gone. He realized that Vance had abandoned him. He realized that the courts had rejected him. Where do I go? Warren asked. His voice was small. They are changing the locks at the office, the house. The house is cross-collateralized. You are going to take the house, aren't you? I looked at him. I thought about the night he kicked me out. I thought about the snow. I thought about the word liability. I am not taking the house. Warren, I said. Hope flared in his eyes. You aren't? No. I said, the bank is taking the house. I am just the one handing them the keys. I turned and walked away. Naomi walked beside me. That was brutal. She said quietly, it was necessary. I said, we walked out of the courthouse and into the bright, harsh sunlight of the parking lot. I took a deep breath. I checked my phone. I had a message from the babysitter. Maya was fine. She was drawing pictures. I walked to my car. As I unlocked the door, I looked back one last time. I saw Warren Turner standing in the middle of the asphalt. He had his phone to his ear. He was making a call. I watched him. He waited. Then he pulled the phone away and looked at the screen. Nobody answered. He dialed again. He waited. Nobody answered. He dialed a third time. He was the man who knew everyone. He was the man who ran the town. But now, he was a man with a frozen bank account and a confession of fraud attached to his name. And in the world he had built, a world based on transactional relationships, a man with no money is a man who does not exist. He lowered the phone slowly. He stood there, surrounded by empty parking spaces, looking at the black screen of his device. He was alone. For the first time in his life, Warren Turner was the one out in the cold. And unlike me, he had no fire inside to keep him warm. The machinery of the law is loud when it finally starts to turn. You might think it is silent paper shuffling, but it is not. It sounds like the click of a padlock on a commercial gate. It sounds like the hum of a tow truck lifting a Mercedes out of a driveway. It sounds like a bank teller saying, I am sorry, sir. This card has been declined. I did not give Warren Turner a weekend to recover. I did not give him a moment to breathe. The second the judge banged that gavel and dismissed the custody petition, I activated the nuclear option. Naomi and I went back to the office and initiated the enforcement of the stipulated judgment. We didn't just ask for the money. We executed the confession of judgment clause that Warren had signed in his arrogance. Within 2 hours, The operating accounts of Turner Ridge Development were frozen. Every check he had written in the last 3 days bounced. The suppliers, the contractors, the landscapers, they all got the notification at the same time. The site of the fake Ohio River Corridor project went silent. We placed a lien on every piece of real property attached to his name. The house in Cedar Bluff where he had kicked me out? Liened. The commercial warehouse where he hid his unsold inventory? Liened. The empty lot he claimed was worth millions? Liened. He was paralyzed. He was a man standing in the middle of a room where the walls were slowly closing in, and he had no doors left. 2 days later, the call came. It wasn't a lawyer. It wasn't a threat. It was Warren. "Can we talk?" he asked. His voice was unrecognizable. It was thin, reedy, like wind whistling through dry grass. "Just family, no lawyers, please." I agreed, but I set the location. I didn't meet him at a diner. I didn't meet him at his house. I met him at the Turner Ridge office, or rather, what was left of it. I walked in at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday. The office was dark. The power had been cut because the utility bill had bounced. Warren was sitting at his mahogany desk in his overcoat, shivering slightly. The room was cold, the same biting cold I had felt that night in the snow 7 years ago. He looked up when I entered. He looked at my white suit. He looked at the file in my hand. "You took it all," he said softly. "The accounts are dead. The crew walked off the job this morning. It is over. It was over a long time ago." "Warren," I said, sitting opposite him. "You just didn't read the statement." He let out a shaky sigh. "Okay, you won. You proved your point. You are smarter than me. You are tougher than me. Now, can we stop? Can we negotiate? If you liquidate the assets at auction, you will get pennies on the dollar. You will lose money." He was still trying to deal. He still thought this was about profit margins. "I can restructure," he said, his eyes pleading. "I have contacts. Give me 6 months. I will pay you back the principal plus interest. Just lift the freeze. Let me work." I placed the file on the desk. "I don't want your money, Warren," I said. He frowned. "What? Then what do you want? You bought the debt. You want a return on investment." "I want the truth," I said. I opened the file. Inside was a document Naomi and I had drafted. It wasn't a loan modification. It was an allocution of fraud and identity theft. "I am going to sell the assets," I said calm. "I am going to auction off the equipment, the land, and this office furniture. Whatever that raises, that is what I get. I don't care if it is 10 cents on the dollar. I will write off the loss." "Then why—" He trailed off. "Because I am not here for the cash," I said. "I am here for my name." I slid the document toward him. "This is a sworn affidavit," I explained. "In it, you admit to 3 things. 1, that 7 years ago, you forged my signature on 3 commercial loan applications without my consent. 2, that you used my identity to secure credit lines that you subsequently defaulted on. 3, that the Lydia Turner credit profile was destroyed by your actions, not mine." Warren stared at the paper. "If I sign this is a crime. This is admitting to a felony. The statute of limitations on the forgery has passed for criminal prosecution." I lied. Or maybe I didn't. I didn't care. "But for civil records, it is alive. I need this document." "Why?" he whispered. "Because you are going to send a copy of this to Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian." I said, "You are going to sign letters that I have prepared, attaching this confession, instructing them to remove the derogatory marks from my history. You are going to tell them that you did it." I leaned forward. "I want my credit score back. Warren, I want the 7 years you stole from me. I want to be able to walk into a bank and not feel like a criminal." He looked at the paper. He looked at the pen. This destroys me," he said. "If this gets out, if the credit bureaus see this, I will never get a loan again. My reputation in this town will be 0. I will be known as the man who stole from his daughter." You are the man who stole from his daughter, I said. You just haven't admitted it yet. He hesitated. He looked around the dark office, looking for a way out. And if I don't sign? He asked. Then I execute the full judgment, I said. I take the house in Cedar Bluff. I evict you. I put you on the street. And I will file a civil suit for damages that will drag your name through the mud for the next 5 years. I will depose every golf buddy you have. I will make sure everyone knows. It was the choice he had given me, compliance or exile. He picked up the pen. His hand was shaking so hard the tip rattled against the paper. I built this name, he whispered, a tear sliding down his cheek. Turner. It meant something. It meant a lie, I said. He signed. He didn't sign with the big, looping flourish he used to use. He signed small. He signed like a man who was shrinking. He pushed the paper back to me. Are you happy? He asked, his voice bitter. You killed your father. I took the paper. I checked the signature. It was valid. I didn't kill you. Warren, I said, putting the document in my bag. I just stopped you from spending me. I stood up. I walked to the door. The auctioneers will be here tomorrow at 8, I said. You should probably clear out your personal things. I left him sitting in the dark. A king ruling over an empire of dust. But I wasn't done. I had one more stop. I drove to the office of Clifford Vance, the building I now owned. Vance was waiting for me. He looked humbled. The arrogance was gone. He looked like a man who was trying to salvage the wreckage of his career. Ms. Turner, he said, standing up when I entered. I have the files you requested. He handed me a box. It contained the original loan files, the emails between him and Warren, the evidence of the shell companies. This is everything, Vance said. I am submitting a self-report to the Bar Association tomorrow regarding the truth certification. I expect a suspension. A suspension is better than disbarment, I said, and it is better than foreclosure. He nodded, swallowing hard. And the mortgage on this building? We will restructure it, I said. Fair terms, market rate, but you pay on time. Clifford, you pay every single month, because if you are late by 1 day, I won't send a letter. I will send a locksmith. I understand, he said. Thank you. He understood the new world order. He wasn't the shark anymore. He was the bait, and I was the one holding the line. And finally, Evan. I didn't meet Evan in person. I let the court handle him. The final hearing for the visitation schedule was brief. Evan didn't bring a lawyer. He couldn't afford one. He stood before the judge, looking young and lost, wearing a suit that looked cheap compared to the ones he used to wear. Mr. Price, the judge said, I am granting you supervised visitation, 2 hours, every other Saturday, at a court-approved center. You will pay for the supervisor. You will undergo a financial audit to determine back child support. Yes, Your Honor, Evan whispered. And let me be clear, the judge added, leaning over the bench. This court remembers the petition you filed. We remember the allegations you made against the mother. If you ever attempt to weaponize the legal system against Ms. Turner again, I will strip you of your parental rights so fast your head will spin. Do you understand? I understand, Evan said. He looked at me as he left the courtroom. He tried to smile, a weak, tentative thing. Lydia, he said, maybe in time, we can be friends? For Maya? I looked at him. I didn't feel hate. Hate takes energy. I just felt indifference. Maya doesn't need your friendship, Evan, I said. She needs to know that her mother protected her from people like you. Be on time for the visitation. Don't be late. I walked away. That evening, the sunset over Pittsburgh was a brilliant, burning orange. It lit up the bridges and the rivers, turning the steel city into gold. I drove home, not to a car, not to a rented room in Braddock, to the apartment I had bought 3 months ago. It wasn't a mansion. It was a 3-bedroom condo with a view of the park. It was mine. My name was on the deed. My credit score was 780. I walked inside. Maya was sitting on the floor, drawing a picture of a bird, a wren. "Mommy!" she yelled, jumping up and running into my arms. I buried my face in her hair. She smelled of crayons and shampoo. She smelled like the future. "Did you finish work?" she asked. "Yes, baby," I said, holding her tight. "I finished it all. It is all done." "Are you sad?" she asked, looking at my face. "You look a little sad." "No," I said, smiling. "I am just light. I feel very light. I made us dinner, macaroni and cheese, our favorite. We laughed. We watched a movie. I tucked her into bed and read her a story about a princess who didn't need a knight because she had a dragon. When she fell asleep, I went to my bedroom closet. I reached up to the top shelf. I pulled down the box. It was the same box I had slammed onto the dinner table 7 years ago. The box of debt letters. The box of shame. I had carried it from the house to the car. From the car to the rental room. From the rental room to the apartment. It had been my anchor, my fuel, my burden. I took it to the living room. I sat on the floor and opened it. I looked at the letters one last time. Final notice. Collection attempt. Liability. I picked up the first letter. I fed it into the shredder I kept by my desk. Whirr. The sound was satisfying. It was the sound of a monster being ground into dust. I fed the next one, and the next. I shredded the forged loan applications. I shredded the nasty letters from the collection agencies. I shredded the memories of the cold nights and the hunger. I shredded the name, Warren Turner. When the box was empty, I sat in the silence of my own home. 7 years. People say revenge is a fire. They say it burns the person holding it, but they are wrong. Revenge, real revenge, isn't about burning, it is about construction. I didn't burn my father down. I just dismantled the house he built on sand. I didn't steal his life. I just took back the one he stole from me. I looked at the pile of confetti in the shredder bin. I wasn't a liability anymore. I was an asset, and for the first time in 7 years. My balance sheet was clean. I stood up and turned off the light. The debt was paid in full. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please comment your city and country below so we can connect and share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel Jane Revenge Stories, like the video, and support us by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.